The silence in the private elevator was worse than the screaming. It was a pressurized, expensive silence that hummed against my eardrums, thicker than the air in the cramped hallway of my old apartment building. I stood pressed against the brushed steel back wall, my arms wrapped tightly around my midsection, holding myself together. I was wearing clothes that weren't mine, soft, expensive cashmere jogging pants and a hoodie 3 sizes too big, provided by Briggs when they dragged me out of my sanctuary 2 hours ago. Underneath the soft fabric, my skin was a road map of fading purple and sick yellow bruises, a tactile reminder of the 3 days that had ripped my life apart. Roman Thorne stood near the doors, his back to me. He hadn't spoken since he told me I was coming with him, that I was pack now because I reeked of his claim. He was a mountain of tension, his broad shoulders rigid under a dark jacket. Even with several feet of steel floor between us, I could feel the radiating heat of his body. But it was the smell that was suffocating me. In the bunker, his scent had been violence, sulfur, hot metal, and raw, feral musk. It had been the smell of impending pain. Here, in this confined space, it was distilled into something richer, something insidious. It smelled like cedarwood and amber, and that same dangerous underlying alpha power. My stomach rolled with nausea, yet beneath the sickness, a traitorous biological wire in my brain hummed in response. My body recognized him. It remembered the weight of him, and sickest of all, it remembered surviving because of him. I dug my fingernails into my palms through the long sleeves of the hoodie until the sharp sting grounded me. Don't throw up, don't faint, don't let him see you break. The elevator slowed, the smooth ascent ending with a soft chime that sounded like a death knell. The doors slid open, revealing not a hallway, but a cavernous expanse of polished stone and glass. Roman stepped out, and the sheer size of the space seemed to swallow even his massive frame. I hesitated, my sneakers squeaking slightly on the steel threshold. "Come," he said. It wasn't a shout, just a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards beneath my feet. An order. I forced my legs to move. I stepped out of the elevator and into the penthouse. It was magnificent. It was horrifying. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire far wall, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline glittering hundreds of feet below. It felt like stepping onto the edge of a cliff. The furniture was sleek, modern, and coloured in shades of charcoal and ice grey. There was no clutter, no dust, no signs of life. It looked like a mausoleum built for a billionaire god. My apartment, the one with the peeling paint, the constant smell of mildew, and the 3 locks I had foolishly thought could keep the world out, felt 1,000,000 miles away. That had been a rusted, rat-infested cage. This was a glass fortress perched in the clouds. "Briggs will bring the few things we collected from your apartment shortly," Roman said, walking toward the expanse of glass. He didn't look at me. It was as if he couldn't bear to see the wreckage he'd made. "You will stay here. You will be safe here." Safe. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. Nowhere was safe if he was there. He gestured vaguely to a wide corridor off the main living area. "The east wing is yours. Second door on the left. It has an ensuite." He was dismissing me. I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I moved toward the hallway, my body aching with every step. My hip throbbed where I'd slammed against the bunker wall on day 2. My neck burned where his teeth had broken the skin on day 1. I found the door he indicated. It was heavy, solid wood with a brushed nickel handle. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was larger than my entire apartment. A king-sized bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens that looked like spun clouds. There was a sitting area with velvet armchairs, a massive walk-in closet that was currently empty, and a bathroom that looked like a spa, all white marble and gleaming chrome. It was clean. It was perfect. It was a cell. I walked to the centre of the room and just stood there, shivering despite the warmth of the cashmere. The silence up here was different than the elevator. It felt thin, precarious. I walked to the door I had just entered through. I needed to know. My hand trembled as I reached for the lock. It was a sturdy deadbolt on the inside. I turned it. The heavy thunk of metal sliding into place echoed loudly in the quiet room. For a fraction of a second, relief flooded me. Locked. I was locked in. Then reality crashed down on me, colder and harder than the marble floors. This was his penthouse, his territory, his fortress. The lock on the inside was the theatre, a placebo, a toy he gave me to make me feel like I had control. If Roman Thorne wanted into this room, a deadbolt wouldn't stop him. He had the master key. Worse, he had the brute strength to tear the door off its hinges if he felt like it. I had seen what he could do to steel reinforced concrete when the frenzy took him. Wood was nothing. I backed away from the door as if it had burned me. I retreated until the backs of my knees hit the edge of the massive bed, and I sank onto the mattress. It was too soft. It felt like it would swallow me whole. I stared at the locked door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my bruised ribs. I wasn't free of the debt. The currency had just changed. Before, I owed money. Now, I owed my existence. I was surrounded by millions of dollars of luxury, high above the grime of the city, protected by the most dangerous creature in the state. And I had never been more terrified in my life. I don't know how long I sat on the edge of that enormous bed, staring at the brass deadbolt. Time had lost its shape over the last 4 days. It had become a fluid thing, marked only by periods of searing pain and terrifying darkness. Eventually, the silence of the room became too loud. It pressed against my ears, amplifying the sounds of my own broken body, the shallow, hitching breath that caught in my bruised throat, the rapid thump of my heart against ribs that felt cracked, even if Briggs had assured me they were only badly bruised. But mostly, it was the smell. Despite the sterile, air-conditioned perfection of the penthouse, I reeked. The oversized cashmere hoodie couldn't contain it. It was the smell of the bunker, sweat, terror, stale air and dried blood. Underneath that was the undeniable, cloying scent of Roman. It was baked into my pores, a biological brand that marked me as his leftover kill. I needed it off me. Pushing myself off the bed required a concentrated effort of will. My knees trembled, threatening to buckle under my own weight. I shambled toward the bathroom, each step sending a jolt of hot misery up my spine to the base of my skull, where a throbbing headache had taken permanent residence. The bathroom was blindingly white. Polished marble floors, chrome fixtures that gleamed like surgical tools, and mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling. I made the mistake of looking into the one above the vanity. The creature staring back at me wasn't Judith Price. Judith Price was invisible. She was a ghost who worked 2 jobs and tried to disappear into the background to avoid her father's creditors. The woman in the mirror was a train wreck in high definition. My hair, usually a manageable nondescript brown, was a matted, tangled nest glued together with sweat and grime. My face was gaunt, the cheekbones jutting out sharply, casting shadows over hollowed-out cheeks. Dark purple crescents hung beneath eyes that looked glassy and vacant, like a doll's eyes left out in the rain. But it was the neck that drew my gaze. I reached up with a trembling hand, pulling the collar of the hoodie down. The skin there was a mottled landscape of violent blues, greens and yellows. And right there, over the delicate pulse point of my jugular, was the puckered, angry red scar of his bite. It wasn't fully healed. It looked angry, inflamed, a permanent reminder of the moment his teeth had sunk into me and changed my physiology forever. A sound tore out of my throat, a choked, high-pitched whimper that didn't sound human. I clawed at the borrowed clothes, ripping them off my body in a frenzy, letting the soft cashmere pool on the cold marble. Naked, the damage was undeniable. I was a canvas of abuse. Every grip of his massive hands, every time he'd pinned me to the concrete floor, every thrust that had felt like it was tearing me apart, it was all mapped out on my skin in various shades of contusion. I stumbled into the massive glass shower enclosure, fumbling with the chrome dials, until water blasted down from the rainfall head. I turned it to scalding. The heat hit my battered skin like a physical blow. I gasped, clutching the tiled wall for support as the hot water sluiced over raw nerves and deep bruising. It burned, but the burn was purifying. I grabbed a bar of unscented, milled soap sitting in a silver dish and began to scrub. I scrubbed until my skin turned bright red. I scrubbed at the dried blood flaky on my inner thighs, at the sweat dried into my armpits, at the phantom sensation of his hands on my hips. I scrubbed the bite mark on my neck until it stung violently, trying to wash the wolf out of my veins. Tears mixed with the spray, hot and salty. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from a bone-deep exhaustion and a terror so profound it felt like my marrow was vibrating. I cried because no matter how hard I scrubbed, beneath the soap and the steam, I could still smell him. He was inside me now, part of my biology, and soap couldn't wash that away. I turned off the water when I felt lightheaded, leaning my forehead against the cool glass until the room stopped spinning. I stepped out onto a plush bath mat and wrapped myself in a towel thicker and softer than any blanket I'd ever owned. I unlocked the bathroom door, steam billowing out behind me, and froze. Roman was in my room. He was placing a sleek silver tray on the small round table near the window. He froze as the door opened, his massive frame turning slowly toward me. Instinct took over. My muscles locked tight, adrenaline flooding my system with nowhere to go. I pressed my back against the doorframe, clutching the towel tighter around me, covering as much of my damaged skin as possible. His nostrils flared. He was scenting the air, smelling the steam, the soap, and beneath it, my unfiltered terror. His golden eyes travelled over me, heavy and tangible. They weren't the feral, mindless eyes of the wolf in the bunker, but they weren't human either. They were predatory, possessive, and horrifyingly intelligent. His gaze snagged on my wet hair, then dropped to my bare shoulders where the towel slipped slightly, revealing the dark bruising on my collarbone. His jaw flexed. A muscle jumped in his cheek. "I didn't hear the water running," he said. His voice was a low rumble, too loud in the quiet room. It wasn't an apology for entering without knocking. It was a statement of fact. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. I just stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The lock, the deadbolt. I hadn't heard him unlock it. He had a key. Of course he had a key. "Briggs brought your things," he said, gesturing to a small, pathetic cardboard box sitting on the floor near the closet. Such as they were. There was no judgment in his tone, only a detached observation of my poverty. He took a step toward me. I flinched so violently my shoulder slammed into the doorframe. He stopped instantly, holding his hands out slightly, palms up, a placating gesture. It was laughable, a tiger showing its paws to a mouse. "I'm not going to hurt you, Judith," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound soothing. It sounded like thunder trying to whisper. "You are safe here. No one will touch you, not even me." "Liar!" My mind screamed it, but my mouth remained shut. His definition of hurt and mine were vastly different. He seemed to realize my paralysis wasn't going to break. He gestured to the tray on the table. "Food. You need to eat. You lost too much weight over the weekend." Over the weekend, as if we'd gone on a bad camping trip. "There are also supplies on the dresser," he added, his gaze shifting away from me, focusing on the wall just past my ear. He was trying to contain himself, I realized. The scent of my fear, combined with the damp freshness of my skin, was affecting him. I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. "Medical-grade salves for the bruising and pain relievers. Take them." It wasn't a suggestion. "I'll leave you to dress," he said abruptly. He turned on his heel and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, his back to me. "Lock the door behind me if it makes you feel better. But Judith?" He turned his head slightly, just enough that I could see the glint of one gold eye. "Don't ever try to leave this penthouse without me." Then he was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind him. I didn't move for a full minute. I listened to his heavy footsteps receding down the hallway, across the marble floor of the living area, until silence returned. Only then did I peel myself off the doorframe. I bolted the door again, hating myself for the useless action, and walked over to the dresser. Next to the pathetic cardboard box containing my faded jeans and worn-out t-shirts sat a collection of items that probably cost more than my father's car. There were jars of thick arnica-infused creams in heavy glass pots, bottles of high-end painkillers, vitamins and electrolyte powders. It was a care package for a victim. I opened one of the jars. The cream smelled medicinal and expensive. With trembling fingers, I began to apply it to my arms, watching the white lotion disappear into the swirling galaxies of purple and black skin. It was grotesque. He broke me, and now he was buying me the best glue money could buy to put the pieces back together, so he didn't have to look at the cracks. I dressed in the cleanest things from my box, an old pair of grey sweatpants and a t-shirt with a faded band logo I didn't even recognise. They felt rough and cheap against my sensitive skin, but they were mine. They smelled like my old laundromat, like mildew and cheap detergent, and for a moment I breathed it in like perfume. I moved to the table. The silver tray held a porcelain bowl of creamy soup, something rich, smelling of lobster and sherry, some artisanal crackers and a glass of water. I sat down. My stomach was empty, cavernous, but the thought of food made bile rise in my throat. I looked at the soup. It was too rich, too much. I took a cracker and nibbled the edge. It tasted like sawdust. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights coming alive below as dusk turned to night. I was hundreds of feet in the air, sealed in glass, a specimen in a jar. Suddenly the knob turned. The deadbolt rattled. A second later, there was the distinct snick of a key turning in the lock, followed by the heavy bolt sliding back. The door opened, and Roman stood there again. He had changed his shirt. The dark jacket was gone, replaced by a black t-shirt that clung to his massive chest and arms. He looked even bigger without the jacket, more raw power exposed. His eyes went immediately to the untouched soup. He walked into the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't lock the deadbolt. He didn't need to. He pulled up one of the velvet chairs and sat across the small table from me. The chair creaked in protest under his weight. He was too big for the furniture, too big for the room, too big for my reality. "Eat," he commanded softly. I looked down at the bowl. "I'm not hungry." My voice was a rusty whisper. "That's a lie. Your body is starving. You're shaking." He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering over the bowl before pushing it closer to me. "Eat the soup, Judith." I looked up at him. It was a mistake. His golden eyes trapped mine. There was no escape in them, only an intense, terrifying focus. He was watching me the way a wolf watches a wounded deer, waiting for it to fall, or waiting for it to heal just enough to be interesting to chase again. "If you don't feed yourself," he murmured, leaning forward slightly, his scent washing over me, "I will feed you." The threat hung heavy in the air. The image of his large hands on me, forcing a spoon into my mouth, was too much to bear. My mind did something strange then. It felt like a gear slipping loose. The terror didn't leave, but it moved away, as if I were viewing it through the wrong end of a telescope. I felt myself float upward, hovering somewhere near the ceiling, looking down at the battered girl in the chair and the monster sitting across from her. "Just do it," the floating version of me whispered. "Do what he says, and maybe he'll stop looking at us." Down below, the girl picked up the silver spoon. Her hand was shaking badly, the metal clattering against the porcelain bowl. She dipped it into the rich pink liquid and lifted it to her lips. She swallowed. It tasted like ashes. Roman watched every movement. He watched her throat work as she swallowed. He watched her dip the spoon again. He didn't speak. He just sat there, a massive, warm, terrifying sentinel, ensuring his property was maintained. I kept eating, one mechanical swallow at a time, floating near the ceiling, waiting for the nightmare to end. The next 2 days were a blur of white coats, cold metal, and intrusive hands. Roman didn't just hire a doctor. He hired a medical team. They arrived in the penthouse like a tactical unit, turning my sterile grey and white guest suite into a high-end triage centre. I wasn't a patient to them. I was an expensive, damaged piece of equipment that the owner wanted restored to mint condition immediately. They set up a portable examination table in the centre of my room. I was told to strip to my underwear and lie down. The humiliation of it burned colder than the air conditioning. I was exposed, a roadmap of violence laid bare under bright, unforgiving portable lights. Dr. Albright, a severe woman with an angular haircut and hands like ice, conducted the examination while dictating to a tablet-wielding assistant. Roman stood in the corner the entire time. He didn't speak, but his presence was a lead weight in the room, a vibrating monolith of barely contained aggression and sickening guilt. Every time I flinched at a prod to a tender rib, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees, and Roman's scent would spike, thick with sulphur. Severe contusions along the iliac crest and lateral aspect of the thighs, Dr. Albright droned, lifting my leg, manipulating the hip joint until white-hot pain shot up my spine. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, refusing to make a sound. Possible hairline fracture of the 6th and 7th ribs. We'll need portable imaging to confirm. Defensive wounds on the forearms. Deep tissue trauma to the cervical spine area. She paused when she reached my neck. Her cool fingers traced the raised, puckered ridges of the bite mark over my jugular. It was the epicenter of the earthquake that had destroyed my life. The mating bite is rudimentary, she murmured, more to herself than the assistant. Inflamed, deep puncture wounds. It will scar significantly. From the corner, a low guttural growl tore through the clinical silence. It was a sound of pure self-loathing, but it made the doctor freeze and the assistant drop his stylus. "Fix it," Roman snarled, his voice rough like grinding stones. "I don't care what it costs. Fix her." The doctor cleared her throat, regaining her professional veneer. "We can manage pain and accelerate tissue repair with localized alpha-stim treatments, Mr. Thorne, but trauma of this magnitude, it takes time." I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't Judith Price anymore. Judith Price was dead in a bunker. I was just meat on a table, being inventoried for damages by the beast who broke it. When they finally left, taking their lights and tablets and judgment with them, I retreated to the bathroom. It was the only place I felt remotely hidden, even though I knew the lock was a lie. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror again. I was getting used to the shock of the reflection, which was a horror in itself. The swelling in my face had gone down enough that I recognized the underlying structure of my bones, but the eyes were wrong. They were hollowed out, the spark gone, replaced by a flat, glassy wariness. I raised a hand, watching the reflection do the same. It felt disconnected, like I was operating a puppet from far away. They talk about amputees feeling phantom limbs, the it on a foot that isn't there, the ache in an arm that's been gone for years. I felt like a phantom person. I remembered being a girl who worried about making rent, who liked oat milk lattes, who hated horror movies. But that girl felt like a character from a book I'd read a long time ago. She wasn't me. This was me. This collection of aches and bruises. This body that jumped at shadows and craved the scent of its abuser just to feel steady enough to stand upright. I traced the bite mark on my neck in the mirror. It was throbbing today. A deep rhythmic ache that seemed tuned to a frequency I couldn't quite hear. Dr. Albright had called it a mating bite. The words made my stomach heave. It wasn't mating. It was branding. I turned away from the mirror, unable to stomach the sight any longer. I needed sleep. The exhaustion was bone deep, a physical weight dragging me toward the mattress. I crawled into the massive bed, pulling the heavy duvet up to my chin, building a soft white fortress around myself. The penthouse was dead silent at night. Being this high up, the chaotic noise of the city below was reduced to a distant oceanic hum. I closed my eyes, willing oblivion to come before the nightmares did. But sleep didn't come. Instead, the silence began to fracture. At first, I thought it was the building settling. A high-pitched whine that I realized after a few minutes was the elevator mechanism moving 40 floors down. Then came a soft scratching sound against the glass of the living room windows. Wind, or maybe an insect, sounds that should have been inaudible through triple-paned thermal glass. I squeezed my eyes tighter, trying to block it out. It was like someone had turned the volume knob of the world up to maximum. The rustle of the high thread count sheets against my skin sounded like sandpaper. The air circulating through the vents hissed like an angry snake. Then I heard the drumming. Thump, 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 thump. It was slow, steady, and incredibly powerful. It vibrated in the air, a low-frequency resonance that I felt in my teeth more than I heard with my ears. I lay frozen, trying to locate the source. Was it machinery? A pump in the building's core? It got louder, deeper. Thump, 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 thump. It was coming from the wall behind my bed, the wall that separated my room from the main living area, the wall Roman had been pacing behind for hours before finally settling down. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't a machine. It was a heart. It was his heart. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He was on the other side of that wall, likely sleeping on the expensive Italian sofa, guarding his inventory. I shouldn't have been able to hear it. It was impossible. But the bite on my neck throbbed in perfect synchronization with that beat. Thump, thump. He had forced his biology into mine in that bunker. He had changed me to ensure I survived his brutality, and this was the consequence. I was tuned to him now. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to drown it out, but it was useless. The sound was inside my head, inside my blood. I lay there in the dark, trapped in the golden cage, listening to the terrifying, steady rhythm of the monster's life force thrumming through the walls, knowing that as long as that heart beat, I would never be free.
Roman's point of view.
Control was my religion. It was the architecture of my life, the steel framework that kept the sprawling Thorne empire from collapsing and, more importantly, kept the beast beneath my skin from tearing the world apart. I could control stock markets with a whisper. I could control rival packs with a show of teeth. I could buy politicians, silence enemies, and build fortresses in the sky. But I couldn't control Judith Price's recovery. It had been 5 days since I dragged her out of that bunker. 5 days of the most expensive medical care money could buy. I'd flown in specialists, forced her to endure scans, slathered her in regeneratives. I had surrounded her with the sterile perfection of my penthouse, a fortress where nothing could touch her. And yet she was still broken. I watched her across the expanse of the polished mahogany dining table. The table sat 16. It was ridiculous for just the two of us, emphasizing the chasm that lay between the creature who sat at the head and the victim huddled at the side. She was wearing soft gray clothes Briggs had bought for her, things that were meant to be comforting but just made her look smaller, drowning in fabric. The visible bruises on her face and neck were shifting color, moving from violent purples to sickly jaundice yellows. In a way, the healing looked worse than the fresh wounds. It looked diseased. My disease. The wolf inside me paced restlessly just beneath the surface of my skin, scratching at the back of my sternum. It didn't understand the human concept of guilt. It only understood results. Mate secured in den, the beast thought, smug and satisfied. Mate smells of us. Good. But then her scent would drift across the table, the sharp acidic tang of adrenaline, the cloying sourness of abject terror, and the wolf would bristle with irritation. Why was she afraid in the safety of the den? It was illogical. It was an insult to the alpha's protection. "You're just pushing it around, Judith," I said. My voice, even when I tried to modulate it into something gentle, came out like grinding gears. It was too deep, too resonant in the quiet room. She froze, her fork hovering over the plate of seared salmon and asparagus I'd had my private chef prepare. It was nutrient-dense, designed for rapid healing. "I'm not hungry," she whispered, not looking up. She never looked up. She spent her life now staring at the floor, at her hands, at walls. Anywhere but at the golden eyes of the monster who owned her. A spike of irrational anger drove itself into my chest. I was providing. Why was she rejecting it? Make her eat, the wolf snarled. Dominate. Force compliance. I shoved the beast down hard. It took physical effort, my jaw clenching until my teeth ached. "The doctor said you need the protein for tissue repair. Eat it." It was an order. I didn't know how to speak to her in anything other than orders. It was the only language I was fluent in. Her small hand trembled, the fork clattering faintly against the china plate. She took a tiny bite of the fish, chewing mechanically, swallowing as if it were broken glass. I watched her throat work. The pale skin there was marred by the ugly, puckered scar of my bite. It was still inflamed, red and angry against her pallid skin. The sight of it brought a conflicting wave of nausea and dark, possessive pride. I'd marked her, in the deepest frenzy of the rut, when my human mind was adrift in a sea of red haze. My instincts had recognized something in her that needed keeping. I had branded her so that every other predator in existence would know she belonged to the Thorne Alpha. Now the human man had to live with the fact that he'd savaged an innocent woman to sate a biological imperative. The salmon on my own plate tasted like ash. I needed to salt it. I reached for the small crystal salt cellar sitting near the center of the table, close to her water glass. It was a simple, mundane movement. Judith didn't see a man reaching for salt. She saw a massive hand, the same hand that had pinned her to cold concrete for 3 days, moving quickly toward her face. Her reaction was visceral and instantaneous. She flinched violently. Her entire body spasmed, jerking backward in the chair so hard the wood scraped loudly against the marble floor. Her hands flew up to protect her head, curling into defensive fists near her temples, her eyes squeezed shut tightly, waiting for the blow. The sight of it hit me like a physical strike to the solar plexus. Time seemed to fracture. Inside me, 2 warring natures collided with explosive force. The man was gutted. A cold blade of horror sliced through my chest. She thinks I'm going to hit her. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? That's all my hands had ever done to her. The realization of the depth of her trauma, the sheer Pavlovian response of terror I had instilled in her, was agonizing. But the wolf reacted differently. The wolf saw her fear not as a consequence of past actions, but as a current insult. Why did the mate recoil from the protector? Her fear smelled like weakness, it smelled like prey behavior, and it triggered an ancient, ugly instinct to chase, to subdue, to prove dominance until the fear was replaced by submission. A low, vibrating growl tore out of my chest before I could stop it. Her eyes snapped open, wide with paralyzed horror at the sound. The wolf pushed forward, demanding I take action, demanding I grab her and force her to understand she was safe, which was the most contradictory, idiotic impulse imaginable. I was hemorrhaging control. I needed to stop the physical reaction, to redirect the violent energy surging through my muscles. My hand, still outstretched near the salt, spasmed. Instead of the cellar, my fingers closed around my own heavy crystal water tumbler. The conflict inside me, the man trying to stop the wolf trying to seize control, manifested in a burst of raw, undirected strength. I squeezed. The thick crystal exploded in my hand. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Shards of glass sprayed across the mahogany table, clinking against china and silver. Water soaked the expensive wood and splattered onto my shirt. Judith let out a strangled cry, scrambling backward out of her chair, tripping over her own feet in a desperate attempt to get away from the sudden violence. She ended up pressed against the far wall, knees pulled to her chest, shaking so hard her teeth chattered audible. I sat frozen, staring at my hand. A large shard of crystal was embedded in my palm. Blood, bright and hot, welled up around it, dripping onto the ruined table setting. The pain was sharp, clarifying. The wolf receded, momentarily shocked by the scent of my own blood. Slowly I looked up at Judith. She was looking at me like I was the devil himself, freshly risen. I had done it again. I had tried to be civilized, tried to be human, and I had ended up shattering the peace and terrifying her further. "Judith," I said. My voice was hollow, empty of everything but self-loathing. She just whimpered, pressing herself harder against the wall as if she could melt into the plaster. There was nothing I could say. Any movement toward her would be interpreted as an attack. Any attempt at comfort would feel like a threat. I was toxic. I stood up abruptly, the chair flying back behind me. She flinched again, burying her face in her knees. I turned away from the wreckage of the dinner and the wreckage of the woman and walked out of the room. I didn't walk toward her guest suite. I walked toward my private gym on the other side of the penthouse. I needed to hit something that wouldn't break as easily as she did. I needed to bleed the monster out of my veins before I did something worse than break a glass. I left her alone in the dining room with the spilled water and the blood, proving once again that the safest place for Judith Price was anywhere I wasn't.
The dreams always started the same way. I was back in my old apartment, the shitty one with the peeling paint and the radiator that clanked like a dying robot. I was safe. I was making tea. Then the lights would flicker and die. The air would turn instantly frigid, smelling of damp earth and copper. The walls would dissolve, melting away until I was standing in the centre of the concrete bunker. It was pitch black, a darkness so total it felt thick, like tar poured into my eyes. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him. The wet rasp of breath, the click of heavy claws on cement, the low, vibrating growl that loosened my molars. "Run!" my mind screamed in the dream, but I couldn't move. My feet were fused to the floor. Then the weight hit me. A mountain of muscle and fur and searing heat slamming me down into the hard ground. Teeth snapped near my ear. Hot saliva dripped onto my neck. "Please," I begged in the dark. "Please stop." The growl deepened into a roar right against my throat, and the teeth sank in. I woke up screaming. It wasn't a Hollywood scream. It was a raw, guttural tear of sound that scraped my throat raw, born of absolute, primal terror. I sat bolt upright in the massive bed, gasping for air that wouldn't come. My chest felt like it was wrapped in iron bands that were actively tightening. The luxurious guest suite was dark, but not bunker dark. City light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. The shadows were moving. I scrambled backward, my heels digging into the mattress, pressing myself against the headboard until there was nowhere left to go. My heart was beating so fast it felt like a continuous flutter in my chest, dizzying and sickening. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning on dry land. The door to my room burst open. The lock didn't even slow him down. The wood splintered with a sharp crack as the deadbolt tore through the frame. Roman filled the doorway. Backlit by the hallway light, he looked enormous, a silhouette of pure threat. He wasn't wearing a shirt. I could see the rapid rise and fall of his massive chest, the tension coiled in his shoulders. He heard me screaming. Of course he did. He probably heard my heartbeat spike before I even woke up. "Judith!" His voice was a low rumble, dropping below the register of human hearing, vibrating in the floorboards. Seeing him there, the architect of my nightmare standing in my reality, sent the panic supernova. "Get out!" I choked out, the words strangled. "Don't touch me! Get away!" I grabbed a pillow and threw it at him. It was a pathetic gesture. He didn't even flinch. The down pillow bounced harmlessly off his chest. He stepped into the room. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to hide, to claw my way through the drywall if I had to. I tried to scramble off the side of the bed away from him, tangling myself in the high thread count sheets. I fell onto the plush carpet, landing hard on my hands and knees, scrambling toward the corner of the room like a kicked animal trying to find a hole to die in. I didn't make it. He moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so large. One moment he was by the door, the next he was looming over me, blocking out the light. "Stop!" he commanded. I couldn't stop. The panic was a physical entity now possessing me. I was hyperventilating, sharp, shallow gasps that brought no oxygen. The room was spinning. Black spots danced at the edge of my vision. I curled into a ball in the corner, hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound of his breathing, which sounded too much like the wolf in the dark. He knelt down. The floorboards groaned. He didn't try to soothe me with words. He didn't know how. He was a creature of action, of physical solutions. His large hands gripped my shoulders. I screamed again, thrashing weakly, my nails scrabbling uselessly against his forearms. He was immovable, a statue made of warm granite. He didn't hit me. He didn't crush me. He just pulled. With irresistible force, he dragged me out of the corner and hauled me against his chest. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and pulled me into his lap, wrapping his arms around me so tight I couldn't move a single muscle. It was a cage of flesh and bone. "Breathe," he growled against the top of my head. His voice was rough, vibrating through his sternum directly into my cheek pressed against his skin. I struggled, fueled by blind terror. I pushed against his chest, my hands slipping on skin slick with a fine sheen of sweat. Sweat that smelled of copper and adrenaline from his earlier rage in the dining room. Let me go, please," I sobbed, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had come, replaced by exhausted despair. "No." The word was final, absolute. He held me tighter. His skin was burning hot. It wasn't normal human body heat. It was furnace-like, radiating through my thin t-shirt, searing my skin. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. Everywhere I turned, there was just him. His hardness, his heat, his scent. And then, the most horrific thing happened. My body betrayed me. Surrounded by the suffocating reality of him, crushed against the source of my trauma, my brain started to short-circuit. The scent of him, that thick, musky combination of cedar wood, sharp ozone, and pure, unfiltered male aggression, flooded my senses. It was the scent of the bunker. It was the scent of pain. But my traitorous biology, rewired by his bite and 3 days of sensory overload, interpreted it differently. The scent was powerful. It was dominant. It was the smell of the apex predator in the immediate vicinity. And some deep, lizard-brained part of me, the part that just wanted to survive, realized something. If the monster is holding you, nothing else can eat you. It was a sickening, perverse logic, but my body responded to it instantly. The adrenaline crash hit hard. My heart, hammering against ribs that still ached from his abuse, began to slow down, trying to sync with the deep, powerful thrum of the heart beating beneath my ear. The heat radiating from him stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a blanket, burning away the cold sweat of terror. My breathing hitched, then deepened. The hyperventilation ceased. I went limp against him, not out of surrender, but out of a horrifying chemical necessity. I collapsed against his chest, shivering violently as the adrenaline left my system. Roman felt the change. The bruising grip of his arms loosened slightly, just enough that I wasn't being crushed, but he didn't let go. One large hand moved to the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my sweaty, matted hair, pressing my face firmer against his neck right over his pulse. He was scent-marking me again, re-establishing his claim. I hated him. I hated the heat of his skin and the sound of his heart. But God help me, I hated myself more. Tears of pure shame leaked out of my eyes, wetting his hot skin. I was crying because I was safe in the arms of the rapist who had broken me. I was crying because my body found comfort in the proximity of the beast, because his terrifying strength was the only thing that could beat back the shadows of the nightmare he had created. We sat like that for a long time on the floor of the ruined room, the monster and his broken toy. He held me together while I silently fell apart, bound to him by fear, trauma, and a disgusting, undeniable biological imperative to survive in the shadow of his dangerous heat. 3 weeks. 21 days of waking up in sheets that cost more than my car. 21 days of gourmet meals I couldn't taste, expensive therapists who asked me to find my safe space, and the constant suffocating weight of Roman Thorne's eyes on me. On the surface, I was healing. The mirror told me so. The horrific landscape of purple and black bruises across my ribs and thighs had faded into sickly yellows and greens, like old parchment, before finally disappearing altogether. My skin was clear again, save for the silvery, puckered ridge of the bite mark on my neck, a permanent collar. Dr. Albright was pleased with my physical progress. Roman seemed fractionally less likely to punch a hole in a wall. But they weren't living inside my skin. They didn't feel the new rot setting in. It started subtly. A persistent queasiness in the mornings, a feeling like I was hungover despite not having touched alcohol in months. I wrote it off as stress. Who wouldn't feel sick waking up every day in the lion's den, waiting for the lion to decide he was hungry again? Then, the queasiness turned violent. I woke up on a Tuesday before dawn, the city outside still a glittering grid of artificial light. The nausea hit me like a physical blow to the gut, roiling and hot. I barely made it to the ensuite bathroom. I collapsed onto the cold marble floor, clutching the porcelain rim of the toilet as my stomach emptied itself with convulsive force. There was nothing in me but bile and acid, burning my throat raw. I heaved until I was dry retching, sweat dripping from my forehead onto the pristine white tile. My body felt alien, seized by a force I couldn't control. It was a different kind of violation than the bunker, less violent but equally invasive. It was a mutiny from within. When the spasms finally stopped, I slumped back against the bathtub, shivering on the cold stone. I felt hollowed out, weak as a kitten. "It's the supplements," I told myself desperately, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "Dr. Albright has me on so many vitamins and tissue regenerators. My system is just overloaded." It was a good lie, a comforting lie. I clung to it with both hands. I managed to brush my teeth, scraping my tongue until it bled to get rid of the taste of acid. I splashed cold water on my face. The reflection staring back at me was chalk white, dark circles under the eyes that no amount of expensive cream could hide. I got dressed in the oversized cashmere loungewear Briggs kept stocking my closet with and ventured out into the main penthouse. That's when the second symptom hit me. The penthouse usually smelled pristine, filtered air, unscented cleaning products, and the faint underlying bass note of Roman. This morning, it smelled like a garbage dump in a heatwave. The private chef Roman employed was downstairs in the open-concept kitchen, preparing breakfast. The smell of sizzling bacon grease drifted up the floating staircase. A month ago, that smell would have made my mouth water. Today, it hit me like a chemical weapon. It was thick, oily, and unbelievably rancid. It coated the back of my throat. I could smell the fat rendering, the metallic tang of the pan, the slightly burned edges. It was overwhelming, magnified 1,000 times by senses that weren't human anymore. I gagged, clapping a hand over my mouth. I turned and ran back to my room, slamming the door, breathing shallowly through my mouth to escape the oily stench. My heart was hammering. What is wrong with me? My hearing had already been dialed up to a painful degree since the bunker. Now it seemed my sense of smell was following suit. I paced the length of my room, trying to calm the churning in my stomach. I caught my own scent, fear sweats, acrid and sharp. It made me nauseous too. Then the door opened, and the primary source of all my misery walked in. Roman. He was dressed for a meeting, a suit that cost more than my father's lifetime earnings tailored to fit his immense frame perfectly. He looked powerful, civilized, and completely lethal. Immediately, his scent filled the room. Cedar, ozone, musk, the scent that had terrified me, then confusingly comforted me during panic attacks. Now, it was just too much. It was so rich, so potent, it felt like I was drowning in it. It was thick and cloying, an aggressive sensory assault that made my already precarious stomach lurch dangerously. He stopped just inside the door, his golden eyes narrowing instantly as he scanned me. He didn't miss a thing. The pallor of my skin, the sheen of sweat, the way I was clutching my midsection. The civilized mask slipped. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "You're sick," he stated, not as a question, but an accusation against the universe. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice tight. I stepped back, putting more distance between us. The closer he got, the stronger the scent, the harder it was not to retch. "Just something I ate." He strode toward me, closing the distance in 2 strides. The wave of his heat and scent hit me harder. "You haven't eaten anything since dinner last night," he growled. He reached out, his massive hot hand cupping my jaw, tilting my face up to the light. His thumb traced the underside of my chin, right near the pulse point. He inhaled deeply, scenting me actively. His nostrils flared. "Your scent is sour," he murmured, displeasure vibrating through his touch. Distress, sickness. His proximity was agony. My stomach rolled violently. I had to fight with everything I had not to vomit all over his expensive Italian shoes. "Roman, please," I gasped, pulling my face away from his hand. "I just need some air, the smell of breakfast." He frowned, looking over his shoulder toward the door. "Bacon? You like bacon?" "Not today," I whispered, leaning against the dresser for support. He watched me for a long moment, his golden eyes swirling with frustration. He hated that I wasn't fixed yet. He'd spent a fortune patching up the outside, and now the inside was failing. "I'll call Albright," he decided abruptly. "Have her run a full blood panel. Maybe your iron is low again." He turned on his heel and strode out, pulling his phone from his pocket, barking orders before he even left the room. I sank onto the edge of the bed as the door clicked shut, relief washing over me as his overpowering scent began to dissipate. A blood panel. A cold spike of pure, undiluted terror pierced through the nausea. I knew what a blood panel would show. Deep down, beneath the layers of denial and trauma, in the quiet, dark place where the truth lived, I knew exactly why the bacon smelled rancid. I knew why I was throwing up every morning. I knew why my body felt like it was being rewired by an alien force. I placed a trembling hand flat against my lower abdomen, over the fading yellow bruises. "No," I whispered to the empty room. "Please, God, no, anything but that." I could survive the bruises. I could survive the nightmares. I could maybe even survive living in this golden cage with the monster. But if I was carrying the monster's spawn in my womb, that would break me completely.
The scent hit me before I even reached her door. It wasn't the usual undercurrent of fear that had become her permanent perfume since I'd dragged her out of the bunker. This was something else, something sour, acidic, and deeply biological. Vomit. I stopped in the hallway of the penthouse, the imported Italian marble cold beneath the soles of my shoes. I was dressed for a merger meeting that would secure Thorne Enterprises' dominance in the eastern seaboard's shipping lanes for the next decade. My tie was perfectly knotted, my mind was sharpened to a razor's edge for high-stakes negotiation. But the smell coming from the guest suite derailed everything. The wolf inside me, usually dormant during business hours, pricked its ears. It didn't care about shipping lanes. It cared about the creature behind that door. Made sick, it grumbled, a low thrum of dissatisfaction vibrating in my chest. "Why sick? Den is safe, the food is good." I strode to her door. I didn't knock. I owned the door just as I owned the room and the woman inside it. She wasn't in the bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled, evidence of another restless night. The sour smell was stronger here, leading me to the ensuite bathroom. I found Judith slumped against the bathtub, looking like a stiff breeze would shatter her. She was chalk white, her skin almost translucent against the dark gray tiles. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. She looked wretched, hollowed out. When she saw me fill the doorway, that familiar spasm of terror crossed her face. But she was too weak to fully recoil. "What is this?" My voice came out harsher than I intended, a low bark of demand. I hated seeing her like this. It felt like a failure of my resources. I was pouring money into her recovery, and she was deteriorating. She wiped her mouth with a shaking hand, flinching when I stepped closer. "Just stomach bug," she croaked, her voice raw. "Something I ate." Lies. Her scent spiked with deception. I moved into the room, the space suddenly feeling too small. The air was thick with the smell of her bile and the underlying cloying scent of the bacon my chef was frying downstairs. I reached down, grabbing her chin to tilt her face up. Her skin was clammy, cold sweat slicking her jaw. But as I leaned in to scent her neck to try and diagnose the underlying cause of the sickness, she did something that made the beast inside me snarl. She gagged. She jerked her head back, clapping a hand over her mouth, her eyes watering. It wasn't just fear of my touch, it was physical revulsion. She was repulsed by my scent. A black wave of irritation crashed through me. I was her alpha. My scent was meant to be her anchor, her ultimate safety. To have her recoil from it like it was poison was an insult to my very biology. My scent offends you, I growled, letting go of her chin abruptly. No, it's everything, she whispered, breathing shallowly through her mouth. The bacon, the soap, everything is too strong. She looked miserable, small, and utterly broken. The irritation faded, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. Hypersensitivity, nausea, sudden onset without fever. The human part of my brain was running down a list of logical medical possibilities. Reaction to the regeneratives, delayed trauma response, ulcers. But my wolf was pacing, agitated, fixated on a subtle, underlying shift in her scent profile that I hadn't been able to place for days. Underneath the fear and the sickness there was something new, something rich and milky and terrifyingly familiar. Something is growing. The thought was so sudden, so impossible that I physically staggered back a step. No. I remembered the bunker. I remembered the red haze, the absolute loss of cognitive function. I remembered the violence of it. It hadn't been sex. It had been a biological possession, a brutal, repetitive claiming born of a broken rut cycle. I hadn't used protection. The concept hadn't even existed in the dimension I was operating in. But the odds, human and wolf biology, were notoriously difficult to mesh without a fated bond. It was rare, but not impossible. A cold dread, heavier than any I had ever known, settled into my marrow. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Get up," I commanded, my voice flat. "Dead. Get dressed. We're going down to the medical bay." "Roman, I don't need—" "Now." The word cracked like a whip in the tiled room. I didn't wait for her argument. I turned and walked out, dialing Albright's private number before I even cleared the bedroom threshold. "Albright, prepare a full panel on Judith Price, blood, urine, hormone levels." I paused, my throat closing up. "Run a beta HCG test first. Stat." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Albright was smart. She knew exactly what that test was for. "Understood, Alpha Thorne," was all she said. An hour later, I was standing in Albright's sterile, gleaming private clinic located 5 floors below my penthouse. Judith was sitting on an exam table in the next room, looking terrified and sickly in a paper gown. I stood by the reinforced window, staring out at the city I ruled, feeling like the ground beneath me was dissolving. Dr. Albright entered the room. She held a tablet. Her severe face was carefully neutral, but I could smell her anxiety. She didn't want to deliver this news. She didn't have to speak. The scent coming off the tablet, off her hands where she'd handled the samples, confirmed what the wolf had already decided. "Tell me," I demanded, not turning away from the window. Albright cleared her throat. "The blood panel confirmed it, Roman. Her hormone levels are through the roof." I closed my eyes. "She's pregnant." The words hung in the antiseptic air. Inside me, 2 distinct and catastrophic reactions occurred simultaneously. The wolf threw back its head and roared in triumphant primal ecstasy. "Pup, mine, blood of my blood." The line continues. It was a victory. It was the ultimate biological success. The beast wanted to storm into the other room, rub its scent all over her belly, and guard her with lethal force until the whelp arrived. But the man was destroyed. Horror pure and absolute washed over me. This wasn't a miracle, this was a nightmare scenario. I hadn't made love to a willing partner. I had tortured a desperate woman for 3 days in a concrete box. This child wasn't born of desire, it was born of trauma and assault. It was a living, breathing manifestation of the worst thing I had ever done. How could she ever heal now? How could she ever look at me without seeing the monster when the monster's legacy was growing inside her own body? Does she know? My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Not yet," Albright said quietly. I thought the alpha should be told first." I turned away from the window. I saw my reflection in the glass, the scarred face, the golden eyes that held too much darkness. I had saved her father from debt only to enslave her. I had saved her from the enforcers only to break her myself. And now, I had sentenced her to carry the weight of my brutality for 9 months and the rest of her life. "Get out," I whispered to the doctor. Albright didn't hesitate. She fled the room. I stood alone in the silence, listening to the faint, rapid thrum of Judith's terrified heartbeat in the next room. And beneath it, so faint it might have been imagination, but I knew it wasn't. The echo of another, tinier flutter. I had thought control was my religion. I realized now with devastating clarity that I had never truly been in control at all.
The silence in the medical bay was worse than the screaming in my nightmares. It was a thick, pressurized silence, smelling of rubbing alcohol and latex. I sat on the edge of the examination table, the crinkle of the paper gown sounding like thunder every time I shifted. My legs swung idly, bare and goose-pimpled in the frigid air conditioning. I stared at the wall, at a framed diploma that meant nothing to me. I was trying desperately not to think, to exist in the empty space between heartbeats. If I didn't think it, it couldn't be true. If I just kept telling myself it was an ulcer, stress, the aftermath of 3 days of physical trauma. The door opened. Dr. Albright walked in first. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the tablet she held, her severe features drawn tight. Then Roman entered. The room instantly felt smaller. The air grew heavier, charged with his overwhelming presence. He didn't stand by the door this time. He walked deep into the room, positioning himself near the head of the exam table, just behind me. A sentinel. A jailer. I could feel the heat radiating off him, smell that complex scent of cedar and power that made my stomach roll with a fresh wave of nausea. I didn't dare look at him. I kept my eyes glued to the diploma on the wall. "Well?" My voice was a pathetic, reedy thing. "Do I have an ulcer? Are my iron levels low?" Dr. Albright stopped in front of me. She finally looked up from the tablet. Her eyes, usually cold and clinical, held a flicker of something that terrified me more than anger. Pity. "Your iron levels are within normal range, Judith," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And there is no evidence of an ulcer." "Then why am I sick?" I demanded, a hysterical edge creeping into my tone. "Why can't I stand the smell of food? Why do I feel like my body isn't mine anymore?" Albright took a breath. She glanced past me at Roman, a silent communication passing between them that I couldn't decipher. Then she looked back at me. "We ran a full hormone panel," she said. "Your HCG levels are extremely elevated." The words floated in the air, abstract medical jargon. My brain refused to translate them. "HCG?" I repeated numbly. "Human chorionic gonadotropin," she clarified, as if the full name would help. When I just stared at her blankly, she delivered the blow with brutal simplicity. "It's the pregnancy hormone, Judith. You're pregnant." The world stopped. The hum of the fluorescent lights died. The air left the room, the diploma on the wall blurred into a meaningless smudge of colour. No. The word didn't even make it to my lips. It just echoed in the cavern of my skull, a desperate, childlike denial against an absolute reality. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But then, the memories crashed over me. The bunker, the absolute darkness, the sound of his growls, the feeling of his teeth on my neck, the sheer, unstoppable weight of him crushing me into the concrete. The relentless, mindless rhythm of his rut. It hadn't been an act of love. It hadn't even been an act of human lust. It had been biological warfare, a violent, primal claim that had gone on for 3 days. And it had worked. A cold wave of horror washed over me, starting at my scalp and moving down to my toes, freezing the marrow in my bones. I looked down at my flat stomach, covered by the flimsy paper gown. It wasn't just me in this room anymore. Something was inside me, a seed planted in violence, growing in the soil of my trauma. It wasn't a baby. In that horrifying moment of realization, it felt like a parasite, a living, breathing piece of the bunker nestled deep within my womb. A choked sound escaped my throat. I wrapped my arms around my midsection, not to protect it, but to squeeze it, to try and deny its existence physically. "Get it out," I whispered. The silence that followed was terrible. "Judith," Albright started, her tone cautious. "Get it out!" I screamed, the sound tearing my throat. I scrambled backward on the table, away from them, away from myself. "Get it out of me! Oh God, please get it out!" I was hyperventilating again, clawing at the paper gown, clawing at the skin of my stomach as if I could dig the truth out with my fingernails. A massive, hot hand clamped down on my shoulder. Roman. His touch, which had sometimes offered a perverse, terrifying comfort, now felt like a brand. It felt like ownership. "Stop," he growled. His voice was low, vibrating with a complex mix of emotions I couldn't pass. Anger, possessiveness, and something else that sounded terrifyingly like triumph. I froze, trembling violently under his grip. I looked up at him then, eyes wide and swimming with tears. His golden eyes were blazing. The pupils were blown wide, swallowing the irises. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking intently at my stomach, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled the scent of my distress and the new, underlying scent of his legacy. The monster recognized its own creation. The realization hit me harder than the initial news. This was why he had brought me here. This was why he hadn't let me go. He had sensed it before I did. My debt wasn't paid. It would never be paid. I wasn't just his victim anymore. I wasn't just his companion in a gilded cage. I was the vessel carrying his bloodline. "You knew," I accused, my voice a broken whisper. "You could smell it." His jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. His grip on my shoulder didn't loosen. It only got firmer, pulling me slightly closer to his immense heat. "It changes nothing," he said, his voice rough granite. "You are mine, and that—" He nodded toward my abdomen, his golden gaze possessive and terrifyingly intense. "That is mine too. We will protect it. We—" The word sealed my fate like the heavy metal door of the bunker slamming shut. There was no escape now. I was trapped not just by walls and contracts, but by my own biology, bound forever to the beast by the living nightmare growing inside me.
Her screams were daggers made of sound, driven straight into my heightened eardrums. "Get it out. Get it out of me." Every repetition of that phrase was a physical assault on the wolf inside me. The beast roared in agitation, pacing behind my ribcage, its instincts screaming to silence the threat to the newly discovered life. It didn't understand that the threat was the mother herself. It only knew that something was rejecting its offspring and it needed to be stopped. The human part of me was paralyzed by a sickening cocktail of guilt and horror. I watched Judith claw at her own stomach, her fingernails leaving angry red welts on the pale skin through the thin paper gown. She was trying to dig out the consequences of what I had done to her. She was trying to exorcise the monster's legacy. I couldn't let her. "Stop," I commanded, my voice grinding like tectonic plates. I moved before I made a conscious decision to do so. I clamped my hand onto her shoulder, not gently. I needed to immobilize her, to stop her self-destruction before she harmed the fragile biological miracle growing inside her. When she looked up at me, accusing me of knowing, accusing me of planting this parasite within her, I couldn't deny it. The scent of it, that faint, milky undercurrent beneath the terror, was undeniable now. "It changes nothing," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You are mine, and that is mine too. We will protect it." The we was a lie. There was no we in this room. There was the predator, the prey, and the unintended consequence binding them together for eternity. She went limp under my hand. The fight drained out of her as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a terrifying, vacant stillness. Her eyes glazed over, staring at nothing. Dissociation. It was the same look she'd had on day 3 in the bunker when her mind had fled her body to survive the onslaught of my rut. It was cleaner than the screaming, but infinitely more painful to witness. "Albright, leave us," I said, not looking away from Judith's shattered face. The doctor hesitated for a fraction of a second before self-preservation kicked in. The door clicked shut, leaving us alone in the sterile silence. I looked down at Judith. She was shivering violently, though the room wasn't cold. Judith. No response. She was gone. I cursed under my breath. I scooped her up into my arms. She was frighteningly light, a bundle of brittle bones and traumatized flesh. She didn't resist, she just folded against my chest, her head lolling against my shoulder near the scar over my eye. I carried her out of the clinic and into the private elevator that led directly to the penthouse. The ride up was excruciating. The small metal box magnified our sense. Her fear was acrid, a sharp tang that coated the back of my throat, but beneath it, growing stronger by the minute now that I knew what to look for, was the scent of the pregnancy. It was intoxicating to the wolf. It smelled of the future, of legacy, of biological imperative fulfilled. It made my canines ache and my blood run hot with a fierce, overwhelming urge to guard. The man hated the wolf for enjoying it. The elevator doors slid open onto the penthouse foyer. I didn't take her back to the guest suite. That room was a halfway house, a temporary arrangement for a paid companion. That arrangement was dead. I carried her past the guest wing, down the long corridor to the master wing. My territory. I kicked open the door to my bedroom. It was a cavernous space of dark wood, leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I dominated. The bed was massive, a sprawling landscape of Egyptian cotton and silk. I laid her down in the center of my bed. She looked impossibly small against the dark duvet, like a broken doll tossed aside. She still hadn't spoken. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling without seeing it. I stood over her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, fighting the urge to pace, to howl, to tear something apart. The situation had fundamentally shifted. Before, she was a bird in a gilded cage, the door locked but the possibility of eventual release hanging in the air, however remote. I was keeping her because I was obsessed, because her scent soothed the beast, because I was selfish. Now, the cage door was welded shut. She was carrying the heir to the Thorne pack, the first natural-born child of an alpha in a generation. There was no scenario, none whatsoever, where she left this penthouse. The contract was void. The $50,000 was meaningless pocket change. She was priceless now, and she was dangerous. I remembered her claws digging into her stomach. Get it out. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. If she woke up from this dissociation and the panic returned, what would she do? Would she try to end it? The wolf snarled silently. The thought was unacceptable. I pulled my phone out and walked to the window, turning my back on her still form. I dialed Briggs, my head of security. Alpha. Briggs answered sharply. The penthouse security protocols, I said, my voice low, devoid of inflection. Lock it down. Level 5. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. Level 5 was maximum containment. It meant nothing came in and absolutely nothing went out without my direct biometric authorization. The elevators would lock, the stairwells would seal, the windows would reinforce. It was prison mode. Level 5, Alpha. Is there a threat inbound? I looked over my shoulder at the woman lying motionless on my bed. The mother of my child. The woman whose soul I had incinerated. The threat is internal, I murmured. Seal the exits, Briggs. No one leaves, especially not her. I hung up before he could ask questions. The heavy metallic thunk of deadbolts engaging echoed through the penthouse walls as the lockdown initiated. I walked back to the bed. I sat on the edge, the mattress dipping under my weight. I reached out and brushed a strand of damp hair away from her forehead. Her skin was cold. I leaned down, inhaling deeply near her abdomen. The scent was there. Life. My life. You hate me, I whispered to her unhearing ears. It was a statement of fact. And you will hate this child because it came from me. I sat up, the weight of my own actions crushing me down, even as the wolf preened with satisfaction at the secured den and the pregnant mate. But you will keep it safe, I vowed to the silent room, my golden eyes burning in the dim light, because I won't let you do anything else.
The sound of the deadbolts engaging, a heavy pneumatic thunk followed by the grinding of steel, echoed through the massive bedroom like a gunshot. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. That sound snapped the fragile thread holding my sanity together. The numbness that had shielded me in the clinic, the dissociation that had turned me into a doll while he carried me here, evaporated instantly. In its place was a scorching, agonizing reality. I was trapped. Not just in this penthouse, but in my own skin. Roman sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me, his massive shoulders hunched slightly under the weight of his own revelation. "We will protect it," he had said. The "we" burned in my throat like acid. I scrambled backward on the huge mattress, putting distance between myself and the heat radiating off his body. I hit the headboard, breathing in short, sharp gasps that tasted of terror and his pervasive cedar scent. "Don't," I choked out. He turned slowly, his golden eyes flat and unreadable. The wolf was near the surface. I could see it in the blown pupils, the rigid tension in his jaw. "Don't what, Judith?" His voice was terrifyingly calm, a low rumble that vibrated through the mattress into my bones. "Don't say we," I gasped, the words spilling out faster now, fueled by a rising tide of hysterical rage. "There is no we. There is you, the monster who broke me, and me, the thing you broke." He flinched. It was microscopic, a tightening around his eyes, but I saw it. Good. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to feel an ounce of the violation drowning me. "Judith, calm down, your heart rate is—" "Don't tell me to calm down," I screamed, the sound tearing at my already raw throat. I shoved myself off the bed, stumbling onto the plush carpet. I needed to move, to run, even though there was nowhere to go. "You did this! You planted this thing inside me!" I clawed at the front of the borrowed silk shirt I was wearing, pressing my hands against my flat stomach with revulsion. "It's not a baby!" I spat at him, tears hot and blinding spilling down my cheeks. "Don't you dare call it a baby! Babies are made with love, or at least consent. This is just 3 days of hell growing inside me. It's a parasite made of concrete and blood and your sickening rut." I saw the change in him instantly. The guilt that had been flickering in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard wall of alpha dominance. He stood up. He didn't rush, but he crossed the room in 2 long strides, looming over me before I could back away. He grabbed my wrists. His grip wasn't violent, but it was absolute. They were manacles of bone and sinew, pulling my hands away from my stomach, stopping me from clawing at my own skin. "That is enough," he growled. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the full weight of his biology pressing down on mine. My wolf instincts, buried deep and traumatized, whimpered and wanted to submit, which only made my human half hate him more. I struggled against his grip, futile and frantic. "Let me go! Get it out of me! I don't want your legacy inside me!" He pulled me closer, until my chest bumped against the solid wall of his. His heat enveloped me, that terrifying, intoxicating warmth that my traitorous body craved even as my mind rejected it. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a subterranean pitch that resonated in my chest cavity. "You will never speak of my child that way again. Do you understand?" His golden eyes bored into mine, inhuman and relentless. "It is not a choice anymore, Judith. It exists. You exist, and you belong to me." I stared up at him, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. "The contract," I whispered desperately. "It was 3 days. The debt is paid. You have to let me go." A harsh, humorless sound left his throat. It wasn't quite a laugh. "The contract is ash. Do you think I care about $50,000? Do you think I would ever let the carrier of the first Thorne heir walk out that door?" He released my wrists, but only to cut my face. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, a possessive gesture that felt like he was mapping his territory. "You aren't a guest here anymore," he stated coldly. "I initiated level 5 lockdown. The elevators won't move without my biometric scan. The stairwells are sealed. The windows are reinforced polycarbonate. You couldn't break them with a sledgehammer." I felt the blood drain from my face. The clicking sound. That's what it had been. "You're a prisoner, Judith," he confirmed, his voice devoid of pity. "A very valuable, very cherished prisoner. You will have the best doctors, the best food, anything you ask for, except the other side of that door." He let go of my face and stepped back, putting a cruel foot of space between us. "Get used to these walls," he said, turning toward the door. "Because as long as my heart is beating and that scent is coming from your body, you are never leaving them." He walked out. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, followed by the distinct sound of another physical lock engaging from the outside. I stood in the center of the enormous, luxurious bedroom. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. I walked slowly to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city stood 20 stories below, bustling with life and freedom, distorted slightly by the inches-thick, unbreakable glass. I pressed my hand against the cold surface. I was in a golden cage, just as I had feared from the moment I arrived. But now, the lock wasn't just on the door. I looked down at my stomach, flat and innocent-looking beneath the silk. The real lock was inside me. Time lost its shape in the penthouse. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting colours of the sky beyond the unbreakable glass. I existed in a vacuum of terrifying luxury. The air was always perfectly climate-controlled, scrubbed clean of the city grit below, but it still tasted stale to me. It tasted of captivity. Roman had made good on his threat. The elevators wouldn't budge, the stairwell doors were immovable slabs of steel. I had tried them all in a fit of desperate, silent panic the first day of the lockdown, until my hands were bruised from pounding on metal. Now, I just drifted. I spent hours sitting on the expensive silk rugs, staring at the city I couldn't touch. I was surrounded by wealth, gourmet food delivered by terrified staff who wouldn't look me in the eye, a wardrobe filled with designer clothes that felt like costumes, a library of first editions I couldn't focus enough to read. It was a mausoleum meant for the living dead. My body was rebelling against me with increasing violence. The nausea was constant now, a churning sea of sickness that was half biological, half psychological. Every time I threw up, I felt like I was trying to purge the bunker out of my system, but the parasite remained, anchoring me to this place and to the monster who owned it. I was sitting in the living room, watching dust motes dance in a shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom, when my phone rang. The sound was shocking in the oppressive silence. It sat on the marble coffee table, vibrating angrily, an intruder from a world I used to belong to. I stared at the screen. Dad. A complicated knot of dread and reflex tightened in my chest. I hadn't spoken to him since before the bunker, since I'd lied and told him I'd found a way to fix everything. I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't have the energy to pretend to be okay. But the old conditioning, the years of being the parent to my own father, the fixer, the saviour, was too strong. I picked it up with a trembling hand. "Hello?" "Judy? Judith, honey? Is that you?" His voice was thin, reedy, laced with the familiar tremolo of nervous desperation. "It's me, Dad," I whispered, my throat tight. "Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Where have you been? You haven't been at the apartment. Your work said you quit." He didn't ask how I was. He never did. He just needed to know where I was located relative to his needs. I'm staying with a friend," I lied, the words tasting like ash. I looked around my gilded cage. "I'm fine." Good. That's good, honey." There was a pause, the sound of him shuffling papers, or maybe lighting a cigarette, the telltale hesitation before the ask. "Listen, Judy, I hate to bother you. You know I do." My stomach clenched. I knew that tone. It was the soundtrack to my childhood. "What is it, Dad?" "It's just, things have gotten a little tight again. Unexpected expenses. You know how it is." I froze. The penthouse grew colder. "Tight," I repeated, my voice barely audible. "Dad, the debt. The 50,000 to the Thorne pack. It's gone, right? You paid it? The silence on the other end stretched, thick with guilt and pathetic evasion. "Dad?" "Well, now, don't get upset, honey," he wheedled, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I had a sure thing, a tip on the ponies. I thought I could double it. Turn that 50 into 100, set us up for good, get you out of those awful jobs. The world tilted on its axis. I couldn't breathe. I remembered the smell of the bunker, the damp concrete, the sound of the heavy metal door sealing me in, the terrifying primal roar of Roman transforming, the pain, the absolute soul-destroying terror of being hunted and claimed for 3 days straight. I had endured that. I had let a monster tear me apart to get that money. "You lost it," I stated, my voice devoid of inflection. I was hollowed out, scraped clean of emotion. "It was bad luck, Judy. Just bad luck. I almost had it." He was frantic now, the desperation clawing through the phone line. "But listen, it's okay. I just need a little bridge loan. Just to tide the loan sharks over until my next check. If you could just... I don't know where you're staying, but if you have a little extra..." He was asking for more money. He had taken the blood money I had earned with my body, with my sanity, and he had thrown it away on horses. And now he was back, hand out, like nothing had happened. He didn't know what I had done. He didn't know I was pregnant with a werewolf's baby, locked in a high-security penthouse. But the fact that he could ask, so casually, after losing everything I had sacrificed for, broke something deep inside me that Roman hadn't even been able to touch. "Judith? Honey, are you there? Just a couple thousand, that's all I need." I lowered the phone from my ear. His tinny voice continued to plead, a pathetic litany of excuses and needs. I pressed the end call button. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. The sacrifice, the bunker, the trauma, the pregnancy. It had all been for nothing. I wasn't a savior. I was just a fool who had sold her soul to save a man who didn't want to be saved. I was utterly, completely alone in this tower, trapped between the monster who wanted to own me and the father who had already sold me.
I listened to the recording of the call in the sterile silence of my security hub. A subterranean room beneath the penthouse where the city's noise couldn't reach. I knew it was a violation. Every phone call, every text message that entered or left the penthouse was routed through this server. I told myself it was necessary protection. She was carrying the Thorne air. Her vulnerabilities were my vulnerabilities. But as I listened to the tinny, pathetic voice of her father, I knew I wasn't listening as a protector. I was listening as a jailer waiting for an excuse to execute a prisoner. I had a sure thing, a tip on the ponies. I thought I could double it. The sound of the ceramic mug shattering in my hand was dull compared to the roar inside my head. Hot coffee scalded my palm, dripping onto the expensive console, but I didn't feel it. Shards of ceramic bit into my skin, drawing blood that my wolf immediately moved to clot. I replayed that segment. $50,000. The price of her body, the price of her sanity. I remembered Judith in the bunker on day 3. The way her eyes had looked through me, vacant and shattered. The way she had flinched when I handed her the water bottle, her spirit beaten so flat she couldn't even muster fear, only base survival instinct. She had endured 3 days of being hunted, bitten, and rutted into the concrete floor by a beast I couldn't control, all to save this man from my enforcers. And he had gambled it away on horses. A low, vibrating snarl tore itself from my chest. It wasn't a human sound. My vision swam, the edges tinting red. The wolf pressed against the back of my skull, massive and demanding, furious beyond measure. It wasn't just anger, it was a primal offense against nature. Judith had sacrificed herself for her pack, her tiny broken pack of 2, and her alpha, her father, had betrayed that sacrifice for a dopamine hit at the track. He was a parasite, a weakling who was slowly bleeding her dry. I stood up, the leather chair rolling back with a screech. I looked at my reflection in the darkened monitor screen. My eyes were molten gold, the pupils blown wide, swallowing the iris. My canines had descended, sharp points resting on my lower lip. I had spent weeks trying to contain the damage I'd done to her. I had hired doctors, secured the penthouse, tried to smother her trauma with wealth and security. I hated myself for what I had done in that bunker. I hated the monster that lived inside me. But right now, the monster was exactly what was needed. The human part of me wanted justice. The wolf wanted a throat. I tapped the intercom on the console. Briggs, my office, now. I didn't wait for an acknowledgement. I stalked out of the security room and took the private elevator up to the main floor. I bypassed the living area where Judith was sitting in the wreckage of that phone call. If I saw her now smelling like devastation and betrayal, the beast might take over completely. I needed to channel this rage, aim it like a weapon. Briggs met me by the private elevator in the foyer. He took one look at my face, smelled the ozone and copper scent of my killing rage, and stiffened into combat readiness. Alpha? The father, I said. My voice was a grinding rasp, barely intelligible. Locate him. Briggs didn't need to ask why. He knew the situation. He nodded once, pulling out his tablet. His usual haunts, the tracks, the dive bars in the East End. It won't take long. He owes people. Find him and bring the car around. We're leaving. Briggs paused. Leaving the penthouse, Alpha? We're under level 5 protocol. Is it wise to leave her unguarded? I turned on him, a growl ripping from my throat that made him take an involuntary step back, baring his own throat in submission. She is not unguarded. The building is sealed tighter than a bank vault. No one gets in. I narrowed my eyes, looking toward the hallway that led to the master wing where I knew she was sitting, likely numb with shock. And I am going to remove the only remaining threat to her peace of mind. I was going to fix what I had broken. I couldn't undo the bunker. I couldn't undo the pregnancy. But I could ensure that the man responsible for putting her there never hurt her again. I strode toward the private elevator, Briggs falling in step behind me. As the doors closed, shutting out the scent of Judith's despair, I felt a grim sense of purpose settle over the wolf. The hunt was on, and this time I wasn't hunting an innocent bird. I was hunting a rat.
I sat frozen on the silk sofa, the phone still clutched in my hand like a dead weight. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against my eardrums. My father had gambled it away. Every second of terror, every brutal thrust, every drop of blood I'd shed in that concrete bunker, it was gone, wasted on a sure thing at the track. I felt hollowed out. A husk of a person sat in a gilded tower, incubating a monster's legacy for absolutely nothing. Then, a sound pierced the unnatural quiet. It shouldn't have been audible. It was muffled, distant, coming from floors below or through the walls thick enough to stop a bomb blast. But my senses, warped and sharpened by the pregnancy, latched onto it. It was a low, vibrating growl that I felt in my teeth before I heard it. Roman, and then voices. Not clear, but distinct enough for my heightened hearing to pick apart the cadence. The father, Roman's voice, a grinding sound like stones crushing together. It was the voice of the wolf, barely leashed. East End tracks, dive bars, won't take long, Briggs replied. His tone was clipped, efficient, military. My heart slammed against my ribs, fracturing the ice that had settled in my veins. Kill him. The words floated up through the vents or vibrating along the steel beams of the building. They were faint, but unmistakable. Roman knew. He had heard the call, and now the apex predator was leaving his den to eliminate the threat. Panic, sharp and agonizing, flooded my system. I jumped up, the phone clattering to the marble floor. He was going to kill my father. A sickening wave of nausea rolled through my gut, a combination of morning sickness and sheer terror. I stumbled toward the kitchen island, gripping the cold stone to steady myself. Why did I care? The thought pierced the panic. My father had sold me out. He was a leech who had finally drained me dry. Part of me, a dark, resentful part that the bunker had nurtured, thought he deserved whatever Roman gave him. But then I pictured it. The violence, the blood. Roman, lost to his beast, tearing a pathetic, weak old man apart. I couldn't have that on my conscience. I had already survived so much horror. I couldn't add patricide to the list, even if Roman was the weapon. If he killed my father because of me, that blood would stain my soul forever. It would be one more thing the Thorne pack took from me that I could never get back. I had to stop him. I ran to the elevator banks in the foyer. The brass doors were shut tight. I slapped the call button frantically, but the panel remained dark. Level 5, lockdown, biometric scan required. I ran to the stairwell door, locked, a solid slab of steel that wouldn't budge even when I threw my whole weight against it. No, 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 I whimpered, tearing at the handle until my fingernails broke. I was trapped, a prisoner in luxury, while the executioner went to do his work. Think, Judith. You've been here for weeks. You watch everything. I forced myself away from the door, breathing in short, shallow gasps. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the penthouse operations, the staff, the silent, terrified cleaners and caterers who arrived at 6 a.m. and left at... My eyes snapped open. It was late afternoon. Shift change for the cleaning crew was happening soon. They didn't use the main elevators. They used the service entrance off the industrial kitchen, a reinforced door that led to a freight elevator, and the rear alleyway for trash removal. It was a long shot. Roman said the place was sealed down, but surely the staff had a way out. They weren't prisoners. I bolted for the kitchen. It was gleaming stainless steel, industrial and cold. The service door was in the far corner, near the walk-in freezers. I threw myself at it, grabbing the handle. Locked. A keypad with a red light blinked mockingly above it. Despair crashed over me. I leaned my forehead against the cold metal door, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. I was going to be too late. Then the door beeped. I jumped back as the lock disengaged with a heavy clack. The door swung inward, revealing a terrified young woman in a catering uniform holding a keycard, a large trash bag in her other hand. She gasped, dropping the bag when she saw me. "Oh God, Miss Judith, I didn't know you were in here. I was just taking out the..." She stopped, staring at me. I must have looked deranged. Hair wild, silk blouse damp with sweat, eyes manic. She looked from me to the open door leading to the dimly lit freight elevator landing. The realization dawned on her face. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be locked down. "Please," I whispered, my voice raw. "Please don't close that door." Her eyes went wide. "Miss, I can't. Mr. Thorne, he said level 5. No one in or out without authorization. If I let you out, he'll..." She shuddered, the fear of the alpha radiating off her. I stepped closer to her. I had no weapons. I was smaller than her, weaker. But I had something else now. I had his scent on me, thick and possessive. I carried his child. I channeled every ounce of desperation into a mask of imperious rage that I didn't feel. I channeled Roman. "Do you know what he will do if you stop me?" I hissed, stepping into her personal space. "I need to leave, now. If you stand in my way, I will tell him you hurt me. Who do you think he will believe? The help or the mother of his heir?" It was a vile thing to say. It went against everything I believed in, using his power, his potential for violence, to bully someone weaker. But I was desperate. The colour drained from her face. She looked at the open door, then back at me, paralysed by two different fears. "Go," I commanded, pointing toward the main penthouse. "Walk away. You didn't see me." She didn't need to be told twice. She dropped her keycard on the floor and fled back toward the main living area, sobbing quietly. I snatched up the keycard, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stepped through the doorway into the service landing. It smelled of bleach and garbage. I hit the call button for the freight elevator. It groaned to life, slow and agonizing. Every second felt like an hour. I expected Roman to burst through the kitchen door at any moment, furious at my escape attempt. The grate rattled open. I stepped into the scarred metal box and hit the ground floor button. As the elevator descended, slow and jerky, I leaned against the graffiti-scarred wall, trembling uncontrollably. I had escaped the golden cage. The doors opened onto a narrow, grimy alley behind the high-rise. The assault on my senses was instantaneous. The smell of rotting food, exhaust fumes, and damp concrete hit me like a physical blow. My stomach heaved violently, and I barely made it to a dumpster before I was sick, retching until nothing was left but bile. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, shivering in the cool evening air. I had no phone, no money, no coat, just a stolen keycard and the terrified knowledge of where Roman was heading. The East End. The tracks. I pushed off the brick wall and started running toward the street, praying I could get there before the wolf found his prey.
The drive to the East End was a blur of motion and murderous intent. I sat in the back of the armored SUV, the silence thick enough to choke on. Briggs drove with military precision, weaving through traffic, his knuckles white on the wheel. He knew better than to speak to me right now. The wolf was pacing just beneath my skin, a caged hurricane of teeth and claws. My vision was tunneling, sharpening on the singular goal ahead. Every time I blinked, I saw Judith's face, not the defiant woman in the penthouse, but the broken creature I had pulled from the bunker floor. $50,000. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money for me. It was about the debt, the transaction. She paid with her body, with her soul to clear a ledger, and that spineless worm of a father had taken that blood sacrifice and thrown it away on a losing horse. By doing so, he hadn't just insulted me. He had invalidated her suffering. He had made the horrors of that bunker meaningless. A growl ripped from my chest, vibrating through the leather cabin. Briggs flinched slightly but kept his eyes on the road. ETA, I snarled. 3 minutes, Alpha. He's at O'Connell's near the tracks, still there according to the tracker on his phone. Good. The rat hadn't scurried back to his hole yet. The scenery outside changed rapidly. The gleaming steel and glass of the financial district gave way to crumbling brick, flickering neon, and the pervasive, sour stench of the industrial yards. This was the underbelly of the city, a place where desperation hung in the air like smog. The car rolled to a stop in front of a dilapidated bar with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. O'Connell's, a place for losers to drink away their last few dollars while watching ponies run on a dusty television screen. Wait here, I ordered Briggs, my voice a low rumble. Keep the engine running. I stepped out into the cool night air. The scent hit me instantly. Stale beer, cheap tobacco, urine, and the copper tang of old blood soaked into the pavement, and underneath it all the sharp, acrid stench of fear. I didn't need eyes to find him. I followed the scent trail. It was weak, corrupted by years of alcohol and failure, but it held a faint, twisted echo of Judith's signature. That familial link was enough. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the bar. The interior was dim, hazy with smoke. The few patrons slumped over the bar turned to look, their eyes bleary. The silence spread outward from the door like a shock wave. They were prey animals, and they instinctively recognized a predator in their midst. My suit cost more than this entire building, but it was the aura of violence rolling off me that made them shrink back against their stools. I scanned the room. He was in a back booth, huddled over a scattering of betting slips, nursing a glass of amber liquid. He looked up as I approached, his watery eyes widening in recognition, and then terror. He scrambled backward, knocking over his glass. The whiskey spilled across the table, dripping onto his cheap trousers. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. I wasn't expecting." I didn't stop walking until I was standing over him, blocking out the meager light from the hanging lamp. He looked pathetic, small, useless. It only made my rage hotter. This weakling was the source of Judith's pain. This was the man she had sold herself to protect. "You lost it," I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm even to my own ears, the calm before the slaughter. His Adam's apple bobbed frantically. It was a sure thing. I just needed to double it, for Judy, to help her. My hand shot out faster than a striking cobra. I grabbed him by the front of his grease-stained shirt and hauled him out of the booth. He yelped, his feet scrabbling for purchase on the sticky floor. "Do not speak her name," I snarled, the human mask slipping. My canines lengthened, cutting into my lower lip. The taste of my own blood was the final trigger. "You sold her to me to save your miserable skin, and then you threw her sacrifice away." I dragged him toward the back exit, ignoring the terrified stares of the other patrons. None of them moved to stop me. In this part of town, you didn't interfere when a wolf came to collect a debt. I kicked open the rear door and threw him out into the alley. He landed hard on the wet asphalt, groaning, rolling onto his back. He put his hands up in a pathetic, defensive gesture. "Please, Mr. Thorne, I can fix it. I just need time." "You are out of time," I growled, looming over him. The beast demanded blood. A throat for a throat. He was a parasite, bleeding my mate dry, and I was going to excise him. I reached down, grabbing him by the throat, squeezing just enough to cut off his air, to watch his eyes bulge in panic. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the terror Judith had felt when that bunker door sealed shut. My claws elongated, slicing through the expensive leather of my gloves. I raised my other hand, ready to end it, ready to tear out the cancer that was poisoning Judith's life. "Roman, no!" The scream pierced the haze of my bloodlust. It was impossible. I froze, my claws hovering inches from the man's pathetic, pulsing jugular. I turned my head sharply toward the mouth of the alley. Judith stood there. She looked like a wraith risen from the ashes. Her hair was wild, tangled around her face. She was wearing thin silk pajamas and no shoes, her feet dirty from the street. Her chest was heaving, her face pale with exhaustion and terror. But her eyes, those defiant, beautiful eyes, were blazing. "Don't!" she gasped, taking a staggering step toward me into the filthy alley. "Roman, please, don't kill him." My brain couldn't process the image. She was locked down, level 5, no one in or out. How? The word tore from my throat, a mixture of fury and confusion. The wolf was snarling in frustration at being denied its kill, but the sight of her, distressed barefoot in this dangerous place, sent a spike of protective alarm through me. She ignored the question. She looked past me at the whimpering heap of a man on the ground and then back to my face, her eyes locking onto my extended claws. "He's not worth it," she pleaded, her voice shaking but firm. "Look at him, Roman, he's nothing. Don't make yourself a murderer for him. Don't do that to me." Her words hit me like physical blows. "Don't do that to me." She wasn't pleading for his life because she loved him. She was pleading because she didn't want my soul stained with his pathetic blood on her account. The tension in the alley was unbearable. The wolf wanted to finish it. The man was reeling from her presence. I stared at her, the mother of my child, standing in filth to stop me from becoming the monster she feared I was.
The silence in the alley was heavier than the humid, garbage-strewn air. Roman remained frozen, a statue carved from rage and violence, his claws inches from the pulsing artery in my father's neck. My father, sprawled on the wet asphalt, saw me. The terror in his watery eyes shifted instantly to a pathetic, wheedling hope. "Judy," he choked out, scrambling slightly so he was hiding behind Roman's legs, using the very monster that threatened to kill him as a shield against me. "Oh, thank God, Judy. Tell him. Tell Mr. Thorne it's just a misunderstanding. Tell him I'm good for it." That voice, that whining, manipulative voice that had formed the soundtrack of my entire life. It was the voice that asked for just $20 until payday. The voice that promised this time would be different. The voice that always took and never gave. Something snapped inside me. It was a violent, audible crack in the foundation of who I was. The terrified girl who had escaped the penthouse evaporated. The daughter who had spent her life cleaning up his messes died right there on that filthy pavement. I didn't look at Roman. I stepped past him, my bare feet splashing in a puddle of oily water. I stood directly over my father, casting my own shadow over his cowering form. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was devoid of fear, hollowed out by a sudden, devastating clarity. "Judy, honey, listen." "No," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a flat, final statement. "You listen. For 26 years, I have listened." I felt Roman shift behind me. The heat radiating from his massive body was intense, a furnace at my back. He slowly lowered his hand, his claws retracting with a wet snick, but he didn't step away. He stood guard, vibrating with unspent violence, watching me. I crouched down so I was eye level with my father. The smell of cheap whiskey and stale fear on his breath made my pregnancy-sensitive stomach roil, but I didn't flinch. "Do you know where I was for those 3 days you didn't hear from me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any scream in the confined space. He blinked rapidly. "Working? You said you were working double shifts." "I was in a bunker under the Thorne estate," I told him, watching the confusion on his face. "Because they came for the 50,000 you owed. They were going to break your legs. Maybe worse." I saw Roman flinch in my peripheral vision, but I didn't stop. "I signed a contract, Dad. $50,000 in exchange for 3 days locked in a concrete room with an alpha in a broken rut." My father's jaw dropped. His eyes darted nervously toward Roman's looming figure. "Judy, what does that mean?" I laughed. It was a brittle, broken sound. "It means I paid your debt with my body. For 72 hours I was hunted. I was bitten. I was raped repeatedly until I couldn't remember my own name. I let a monster tear me apart so you wouldn't get hurt." Tears finally leaked from his eyes, mixing with the grime on his face. "Oh my God. Judy, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "And then," I continued relentlessly, "I came out. I survived. And 2 days later, you called me. You asked for money, because you took that $50,000, the price of my soul, and you put it on a pony that was lost. I thought I could double it," he whimpered. The same pathetic excuse. Rage, pure and cleansing, flooded through me. It burned hotter than Roman's heat. I grabbed the front of his filthy jacket, my knuckles white. "You gambled away my sacrifice," I hissed. "You made it mean nothing." I let go of him with a shove of disgust and stood up. I placed both hands flat on my stomach, pressing down against the silk of my pajamas so he couldn't miss the gesture. "And this?" I looked down at him, letting the full weight of the truth crush him. "Do you see this?" He stared at my abdomen, uncomprehending for a moment, before horror dawned on his face. "I'm pregnant," I stated coldly. "This isn't a grandchild for you to bounce on your knee. This is a receipt. This is the lasting consequence of cleaning up your mess one last time." He began to sob openly now, reaching a shaking hand toward my foot. "Judy, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Help me up. We can fix this. Daddy will fix it." I stepped back, away from his touch, as if he were contagious. "No," I said. The word felt like a profound release, a shackle falling from my ankle. "You won't fix anything. You never have." I looked down at the pathetic man who had shaped my life through his weakness. I felt nothing for him. The well of duty and guilt I had drawn from my entire life was completely dry. "You are dead to me," I told him. The words hung in the damp air, absolute and irreversible. "Don't call me. Don't look for me. If you ever come near me again, I won't stop him next time." I jerked my head toward Roman. My father stayed on the ground, sobbing into his hands. I turned my back on him. I faced Roman. The alpha was staring at me, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a strange, terrifying awe. The beast in him was settling, reacting to the sheer force of my rejection of the threat on the ground. I was barefoot in a filthy alley, wearing pajamas, pregnant by assault, and utterly broken. But for the first time in my life, standing between a monster and a coward, I chose myself.
The silence that fell over that putrid alley was heavier than the humid air, thicker than the smell of stale beer and urine. It was the silence of a battlefield just after the final shot has been fired. My claws were still partially extended, aching with the denied release of violence. My blood was still a roaring torrent in my ears, demanding the kill I had come here for. The pathetic creature on the wet asphalt was still sobbing into his hands, a broken man who deserved far worse than death. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed not by any physical force but by the sheer blinding shock of what I had just witnessed. I had expected her to crumble. When she burst into the alley, barefoot and frantic in her silk pajamas, I thought she had come to beg, to plead for the life of the parasite who had bled her dry. I had been prepared to ignore her weakness, to do what needed to be done to secure my territory. Instead, I watched Judith, the woman I'd broken, the woman who flinched when I reached for the salt, systematically obliterated the man who sired her. I hadn't needed to tear out his throat. She had done something far more devastating. She had torn out his soul with words that were sharper than any claw I possessed. I paid your debt with my body. Hearing her say it out loud in the cold night air was like taking a blade to the gut. It was one thing to know what I had done in the abstract haze of the rut. It was another to hear the victim weaponize her trauma against the man who had sold her into it. And then, the final blow, the pregnancy. I watched her standing there, her back to me, her spine steel straight beneath the thin fabric of her nightclothes. The air around her crackled with an energy I recognized instantly. It was the same energy that filled a room when I entered it. Dominance. She hadn't just rejected him. She had alphaed him. In the filth of the East End, with nothing but her voice and her pain, she had asserted her absolute authority over her own existence. The raging beast inside my chest, the one that wanted to paint the alley red with her father's blood, suddenly went still. It didn't retreat, it just stopped. It looked at the small, trembling female figure and gave a low, rumbling growl of approval. She was a survivor. She was vicious. She was magnificent. The man on the ground dared to look up, his eyes pleading one last time toward his daughter's rigid back. "Judy," he wheezed. I didn't even think. I stepped forward, the movement fluid and lethal, placing myself between him and her. The wolf was no longer interested in killing him. The wolf was interested in ensuring this piece of refuse never breathed the same air as her again. I leaned down, my voice a seismic rumble meant only for him. "You heard her. You are dead. If I ever smell you within 10 miles of my city again, I will finish what I started tonight. And I will take days to do it." He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, slipping in the grime, nodding frantically before hauling himself up and fleeing down the alley like the rat he was. I watched him go, feeling a strange emptiness where the murderous rage had been. Then I turned to Judith. She hadn't moved. She was staring at the brick wall opposite her, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had fueled her scorched earth campaign was evaporating, leaving nothing behind but wreckage. "Judith," I said. My voice was rough, still thick with the remnants of the shift. She flinched violently at her name as if coming out of a trance. She started to turn toward me, but her legs gave out. It wasn't a graceful faint, it was a total systemic collapse. Her knees just folded. I moved faster than humanly possible. I caught her inches from the filthy pavement, my arm sweeping around her waist, hauling her up against my chest. She was dead weight in my arms. Her head lolled against my shoulder, her skin clammy and pale in the meager light. Her eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused. She had spent every ounce of energy she possessed to cut the cord that bound her to her past. My heart hammered against my ribs, a different kind of panic setting in now. I could smell the exhaustion rolling off her, acrid and deep, and beneath it the faint sweet milk scent of the pregnancy tainted by fear. I scooped her up into a bridal carry. She was impossibly light. I remembered how she felt during those 3 days in the bunker, soft, yielding, breakable under my frantic weight. But the woman I held now didn't feel breakable. She felt like tempered glass that had just survived a hammer blow. Cracked, yes, but still whole. I walked out of the alley toward the idling SUV. Briggs was standing by the rear door, his usually impassive face showing a crack of stunned disbelief as he took in Judith's appearance and the absence of a body. He opened the door without a word. I didn't shove her in. I climbed into the back seat with her, cradling her against me. I settled her head on my shoulder, pulling the lapel of my ruined suit jacket around her shivering form to shield her from the cold. "Home," I commanded Briggs. "Fast." The drive back to the tower was silent. Judith didn't stir. She breathed in shallow, hitching gasps against my neck. I kept one hand splayed flat on her back, feeling the fragile rhythm of her lungs, while the other rested instinctively on her thigh, anchoring her to me. I looked down at the top of her tangled hair, smelling the alley filth that clung to her, mixed with her own unique scent that my beast had laid claim to weeks ago. Something had fundamentally shifted tonight. I had dragged her into my world as collateral, a thing to be used to satiate a biological imperative. I had locked her in my penthouse to protect my property, both her and the fetus. But as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, I realized I wasn't holding a prisoner, and I wasn't holding a victim. I was holding the mother of my child who had just walked into hell barefoot to stop me from damning myself and then proceeded to burn down her own history to ensure our future. A dark, heavy weight settled in my gut. It wasn't just guilt anymore, it was awe, tinged with a terrifying new realization. She despised me, she feared me, but tonight she had stood shoulder to shoulder with my violence and hadn't blinked. I tightened my grip on her slightly, a silent vow forming in the darkness of the car. I had broken her to save myself. I didn't know if that could ever be fixed. But as the SUV pulled into the subterranean garage of my fortress, I knew one thing for certain. No one, not even me, would ever hurt her again. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was suffocating, but for the first time since I'd brought Judith here, the tension wasn't born of my need to control her. It was born of a terrifying, unfamiliar need to abase myself before her. She had woken up somewhere between the garage and the 40th floor. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't flinched away from where her head rested against my chest. She just went rigid, her breathing hitching as awareness returned. She pulled herself away from me, putting inches of cool leather seat between us, wrapping her arms around herself in my ruined jacket. When the elevator doors slid open, revealing the sprawling, silent luxury of the penthouse, it didn't feel like my fortress anymore. It felt like a waiting room for a judgment I knew I deserved. "Judith," I said. My voice was rough, like gravel grinding in a mixer. She stepped out of the elevator, her bare feet silent on the polished marble. She looked like a war refugee, hair matted, face streaked with grime and dried tears, wearing ridiculous silk pajamas and an oversized suit jacket that smelled of my violence. Yet she held her head high. The steel I'd seen in the alley hadn't softened. "I want a shower," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. She didn't look at me. "And I want these clothes burned." "Done," I said immediately. The urge to cater to her every whim was a strange, compelling force in my chest. The wolf, usually so demanding of submission, was docile, practically whining at her feet in deference to the strength she'd shown. She walked toward her suite. I watched her go, fighting the instinct to follow, to guard the door, to suffocate her with the protection she despised. I forced myself to turn away toward the living area. I went to the wet bar and poured 3 fingers of rare scotch into a heavy crystal glass. I didn't drink it. I just stared at the amber liquid, seeing the reflection of a monster in the glass. An hour later, she emerged. She was wearing thick gray sweatpants and a hooded sweatshirt she must have scavenged from somewhere. They were too big to be hers. Maybe Briggs had left them. She looked scrubbed raw, her hair damp and combed straight back from her pale face. The scent of the alley was gone, replaced by soap and her own underlying fragrance, now laced heavily with the metallic tang of pregnancy hormones. She stopped at the edge of the living room rug. She didn't sit. She stood with her arms crossed over her chest, guarding her midsection. "You didn't kill him," she stated. It wasn't a question. I turned from the window, glass still in hand. "No, because you told me not to." Her eyes, dark and shadowed, narrowed slightly. "Since when do you listen to anyone, Roman?" "Since tonight," I said, setting the untouched drink on a side table. The clink of glass on wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I needed to do this. I had to cut open the festering wound of my past and let the poison drain out, even if the sight of it disgusted her further. She had laid her trauma bare in that alley to stop me. I owed her the same. "Sit down, Judith," I said, trying to keep the command out of my voice and trying to make it a request. She hesitated, her entire body poised for flight, before slowly walking to an armchair opposite the sofa. She sat perched on the edge, ready to bolt. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I paced to the fireplace, putting distance between us, needing the physical space to get the words out. "You asked me once," I began, looking at the cold ashes in the grate, "why I have a bunker, why a man with my resources needs a dungeon to survive his own biology." She didn't answer. I could hear her heart rate pick up, a fast, light rabbit thump in her chest. "A normal alpha rut is intense," I said, forcing myself to speak clinically. "It's driven by instinct, a need to breed, to claim, but it's manageable. With a willing partner, it can even be pleasurable." I turned to face her. She was watching me with wary and tense eyes. "Mine are not normal, mine are broken." I took a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. 12 years ago, before I took over the pack, I found my fated mate. Her name was Sarah. Saying her name out loud felt like tearing open an old scar. I hadn't spoken it in a decade. We were together for 6 months. It was everything the legends say it is. A biological imperative that rewrites your entire existence around another person. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. And then a rival pack, one my father had failed to crush, decided to send a message. Judith went very still. They didn't come for me. They waited until I was out of the city on business. They broke into our home. The memory assaulted me. The scent of blood and terror that greeted me when I returned, the sight of what they had left behind. The wolf inside me let out a low, keening whine that I barely suppressed. They didn't just kill her, Judith. They butchered her. They defiled her to spite me. I saw Judith's hand twitch against her arm, her knuckles turning white. When an alpha loses a fated mate that violently, something snaps inside. The bond doesn't just dissolve, it rips away, taking pieces of your psyche and your biology with it. My wolf went insane with grief and rage. I hunted down every single one of them. It took me 3 weeks. I don't remember much of it, only the blood. I looked at my hands, surprised they weren't stained red right now. After that, the ruts changed. They stopped being about connection or pleasure. They became violent, destructive spasms of a broken biological cycle trying to restart itself and failing. The beast is terrified, enraged, and in agonizing pain. It wants to destroy everything around it because the one thing it was supposed to protect is gone. I looked up, meeting her gaze squarely. That is why I built the bunker, because if I am not locked down, buried under 10 feet of concrete and steel, I will tear this city apart looking for a ghost. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. My enforcers, I continued, my voice dropping to a shame-filled rumble. They know when the cycle is starting. They know the signs. When they saw your father's death, they made a calculation. They thought they were solving a problem for me. They thought they were procuring a medical device. A warm body, Judith whispered, the words slicing the air. Yes. I didn't flinch from the truth. When they brought the contract to me, the human part of me was disgusted, but the wolf was already rising. The pain was already starting, and it saw a way out. I took a step toward her, then stopped when I saw her flinch back against the chair. I am not telling you this for sympathy, I said fiercely, and I am certainly not telling you this to excuse what I did to you in that room. There is no excuse. I took your life and I used it to patch a hole in my own. I looked at her, small, damaged, pregnant with the consequences of my broken nature. I hated the wolf for what it wanted. I hated myself for signing that paper, but when that door locked, I wasn't a man anymore. I was just pain and instinct. I dropped to one knee, not in supplication, but to lower myself, to stop looming over her. You were innocent collateral damage in a war I lost 12 years ago. It was monstrous. I am monstrous. Her eyes were wide, glassy with unshed tears, processing the horror of my history and how it had collided so catastrophically with her own. I can't undo it, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I can't give you those 3 days back. I can't erase the memories. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I looked pointedly at her stomach where my air was growing, a life created in violence and fear. But you need to know what you are dealing with. You aren't just trapped with an asshole alpha, Judith. You are trapped with a man whose soul was gutted a decade ago, and who broke you because he didn't know how else to survive. I stayed on one knee waiting. I had given her the weapon. I had shown her the weak point in the armor. Now I had to see if she would use it to finish what she started in the alley, or if the survivor I had seen tonight would find a different way to handle the monster in her living room.
He remained on one knee, a titan brought low by his own confession. The silence in the penthouse stretched, taut and brittle, filled only by the humming of the oppressive city below us. I stared at Roman Thorne. For weeks, he had been a mythological terror to me, the big bad wolf, a creature of pure ID and violence that had shattered my life because it could. Now, listening to the raw, grinding agony in his voice as he spoke of a dead mate and a butchered past, the mythology crumbled. He wasn't a monster under the bed. He was a man driving a car with cut brakes, terrified of the crash but unable to stop it. It didn't fix it. Knowing his wolf was insane with grief didn't erase the feeling of his teeth on my neck, or the crushing weight of his body in that bunker. It didn't scrub the memory of my own screams from my mind. But it made him human, a horrifyingly damaged human, but human nonetheless. "Stand up," I said. My voice was thin, brittle as old paper. He looked up, his molten gold eyes unguarded for the first time since I'd met him. He hesitated, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to move without my permission. "Stand up, Roman," I repeated, sharper this time. "I can't talk to you down there. It feels theatrical." A muscle feathered in his jaw. He rose slowly, unfolding his massive frame until he was towering over me again. But the energy was different. The suffocating pressure of his dominance was dialed back, restrained by a visible effort of will. I walked away from him, towards the towering glass windows that looked out over the city. The view was spectacular, expensive, and utterly cold. I ran the calculations in my head. They were cold, hard computations of survival, the kind I used to make when deciding which utility bill to skip so we could eat. I hated him. A deep, vibrating current of resentment ran through me every time I looked at him, but I was pregnant with an alpha heir. My body was currently a battlefield of hormones that were traitorously wiring me to find comfort in his scent, to feel safer when he was near. And outside this fortress? Outside was a world where my father was a desperate gambling addict who knew my worth down to the dollar. Outside was poverty, insecurity, and 100 threats that Roman's presence kept at bay. If I left, he would hunt me down. He had made that clear. Not to hurt me, but to protect his property. I would spend my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for Briggs or the blonde giant to drag me back. I was trapped. I had traded the rusty cage of my father's debt for this golden one, and the door was welded shut by biology and circumstance. Wait, No. I thought about the alley. I thought about the sound of my own voice telling my father he was dead to me. I wasn't that cowering girl anymore. If I was going to be in a cage, I was going to dictate the size of the bars. I turned away from the window and faced him. He hadn't moved. He was just watching me, his stillness unnerving. I can't leave, I said flatly. His shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly, a microscopic release of tension. No, you can't. It isn't safe for you or the... He glanced at my stomach. Don't, I snapped, wrapping my arms defensively around my middle. Don't talk about it like it's a piece of cargo you ordered. He flinched. Judith, Listen to me. I cut him off, stepping closer. The fear was still there, pounding in my throat, but I pushed it down with the same ruthless energy I'd used earlier tonight. I understand why you're broken. I pity you for what happened to Sarah, but that doesn't absolve you. You bought me to be a chew toy for your grief. His nostrils flared, his breath hitching, but he took the accusation without arguing. I am stuck here, I continued, my voice gaining strength. My body is... confused. It seems to think you're safety instead of danger, and I know you won't let me go even if I begged. So, we are in a hostage situation, Roman. Only I'm tired of being the only hostage. He narrowed his eyes slightly, intrigued despite himself. What are you proposing? Terms of existence, I said. If I am staying in this tower, I am not staying as your prisoner, and I am certainly not staying as your pet. You are not a pet, he growled, the beast rumbling low in his chest. Then stop treating me like one. Stop treating me like something breakable you have to keep on a high shelf. I held up 3 fingers, my hand shaking slightly. 3 conditions, non-negotiable. He waited, his entire focus sharpened to a terrifying point on me. 1, I said, ticking off a finger. Agency. No more locking me in rooms. No more guards shadowing me to the bathroom. If I want to go for a walk, I go for a walk. If I want to go to the library, I go. You can send security, fine. But they answer to me, not just you. I am not an inmate. His jaw clenched. I could see the struggle, his instinct to lock down and control warring with his newfound respect for my boundaries. 2, I continued, not giving him time to object. Money. My own money. Not an allowance you dole out like I'm a child. I want access to the 50,000 I earned in that bunker. And I want a stipend. A real one. I won't ask you for money for Tampax or a coffee. I need to know I can support myself, even in here. He nodded sharply. Done. That's easy. You'll have an account by morning. Money was easy for him. The control was hard. And 3. I stepped closer, until I was almost within touching distance, invading his space for the first time. I looked up into those molten gold eyes, smelling the storm of emotions rolling off him. Guilt, possessiveness, and something hotter, deeper. I placed a hand flat on my stomach. My body, my pregnancy, my decisions. Dr. Albright talks to me. We make the medical plan. You don't get to override me because your wolf gets twitchy. If I say no to a test, it's no. If I say I need space, you give it. You are the sire, Roman, but I am the vessel, and I am the one doing the work. The silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. This was the hardest weld to break. His alpha biology screamed at him to take total control of the reproduction process, to guard and manage every second of it. I watched his chest heave. A growl ripped from his throat, frustration and instinct battling with his human reason. He turned away from me, pacing toward the fireplace, running a massive hand through his shaggy hair. He gripped the marble mantelpiece, his knuckles white, his back vibrating with tension. He stayed like that for a long minute, fighting a silent, internal war. Finally, he turned back. He looked exhausted. The golden fire in his eyes was dimmed. Agreed, he grated out. The word sounded like it cost him blood to say. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My knees felt weak again, but I locked them. Good, I whispered. It wasn't a victory. I was still pregnant by my rapist, living in his fortress, bound to him by trauma and biology. But as I stood there in the oversized grey sweats, facing down the alpha of the Thorne pack, I knew I had just carved out a foxhole. I wasn't safe, but I wasn't powerless anymore. The morning after the negotiation, I woke up alone. It was the first time in weeks that I hadn't woken up to the oppressive, heavy heat of Roman's presence nearby, either sprawled in the bed next to me or lurking in the doorway like a gargoyle guarding its cathedral. The silence in the guest suite, my suite, as I was trying to think of it now, was profound. I lay still, staring at the impossibly high ceiling, cataloguing my body. The deep, bone-weary ache that had settled into my marrow since the bunker was still there. A persistent background noise, but overlaying it was the new, insidious sickness that arrived like clockwork every morning. It wasn't just nausea, it was a profound revulsion to the world. My sense of smell, already sharpened by the pregnancy, was currently a curse. I could smell the cleaning products the staff used 3 rooms away, the faint metallic tang of the city pipes, and, underneath it all, the pervasive, woody, spiced scent of the alpha who owned this tower. My stomach rolled violently. I scrambled out of the acre of Egyptian cotton sheets and barely made it to the ensuite bathroom before I was dry-heaving into the marble toilet. There was nothing to bring up but bile and bitterness. I sat on the cold floor afterward, shivering in my oversized sweats, sweat cooling on my forehead. I hated this. I hated that my body was no longer my own, hijacked first by his violence and now by its consequences. But then I remembered the night before. I remembered his knees hitting the floor. I remembered the look on his face when I laid out my terms. He hadn't liked it. The beast behind his golden eyes had wanted to roar and crush my pathetic rebellion. But he had agreed. I dragged myself up and brushed my teeth 3 times to get the taste of sickness out of my mouth. I walked into the bedroom and saw my phone on the bedside table, a sleek new model Briggs had provided when mine couldn't be located after the bunker. The notification light was blinking. I picked it up. There was an email from a bank I'd never heard of, confirming the opening of a secure checking account in my name only. The balance stared back at me, an obscene number of zeros. $50,000, plus a monthly stipend transfer that was more than I used to make in 6 months at both my dead-end jobs combined. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. It was blood money. Every cent of it was payment for the 3 days that had torn my soul apart. It felt dirty. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I closed the email. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt practical. This money was armor. It was a go bag. It was the difference between being a victim and being a survivor with options. I got dressed, choosing jeans and a thick sweater that hid the slight, terrifying thickening of my waist. Today was test day. I walked out into the main living area. The penthouse was quiet, bathed in morning light that felt too bright for my headache. Roman wasn't there, which was a small mercy. The air still thrummed with his recent presence, a lingering energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. But the man himself was absent. Briggs was waiting by the elevator. He wasn't lounging today, he was standing at attention. When he saw me, he didn't offer his usual vaguely condescending nod. He shifted, his massive shoulders hunching slightly in a gesture of deference that looked utterly alien on him. "Miss Judith," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The Alpha informed us of the new protocols. How may I assist you today?" "Miss Judith, not the girl, not the package, not just a grunt." "I want to go out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need air, and I want to go to a bookstore." I waited for the pushback. I waited for the "Roman wouldn't like that," or the "it's not safe." Briggs didn't even blink. "Of course, I'll bring the car around. Do you prefer the sedan or the SUV?" I blinked. "The sedan. It's less conspicuous." "As you wish." 10 minutes later, I was walking out of the lobby of the Thorne Tower. It was the first time I had breathed outside air since Roman had dragged me back here from my apartment. It was awful. The sensory overload hit me like a physical blow. The noise of the traffic was deafening. The smells of the city, diesel fumes, rotting garbage from an alley 3 streets over, the cloying sweetness of a pretzel vendor, assaulted my hypersensitive nose. I stumbled slightly on the sidewalk. Briggs, who was walking a respectful 2 paces behind me, instantly moved to my side, his hand hovering near my elbow without touching. "Are you all right, Miss Judith?" "It's loud," I managed to whisper, pressing a hand to my temple. "The pregnancy enhances the senses rapidly," he said, his tone surprisingly clinical. "The alpha's scent usually helps dampen the intake, grounds the omega. Without it close by, the world can be abrasive." I shot him a glare. "I am not an omega." "Biologically, at the moment, your body begs to differ," he said simply, not arguing, just stating a fact that made me want to scream. We made it to a large chain bookstore a few blocks away. I wandered the aisles for an hour, breathing in the scent of paper and glue, which was blessedly neutral. No one looked at me. No one knew I was carrying a werewolf air, or that the massive man hovering near the biography section was ready to kill anyone who bumped into me. For an hour, I was just a woman looking for a distraction. I bought 3 paperbacks with my new debit card. The transaction went through without a hitch. It was a small thing, buying a book with my own money, but it felt like taking a breath after being underwater for weeks. By the time we returned to the penthouse, I was exhausted. The outing had drained me completely. The nausea was back, accompanied by a bone-deep fatigue. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. The moment I stepped inside, my traitorous body reacted. Roman was home. It wasn't that I saw him. It was the shift in the air pressure. It was the scent, that deep, rich forest smell that instantly coated the back of my throat, drowning out the city stench that had been making me sick for hours. My shoulders dropped. The headache that had been pounding behind my eyes receded. The wolf fetus inside me, which had been a restless, churning knot of anxiety all afternoon, settled down. I hated it. I hated the sheer biological relief that washed over me just because my tormentor was nearby. It felt like the ultimate betrayal of my own mind. He was in the living area, standing by the windows where we had negotiated the night before. He turned as I entered, his golden eyes sweeping over me, assessing, cataloguing. He looked tense. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and I could see the tight cords of muscle in his neck. He had clearly hated every second I was out of his immediate sight. "You went out," he said. It wasn't an accusation, but it was close. "I did," I said, walking past him toward the kitchen to get water. I refused to cower. I refused to offer explanations he hadn't asked for. "I bought books." He turned, following my movements with predatory intensity. "Briggs said you seemed overwhelmed by the noise." Damn Briggs and his reports. "I'm fine," I said, pouring a glass of water with a shaking hand. "It's just a lot. The smells are intense." Roman took 2 long strides and was suddenly at the kitchen island across from me. The proximity was overwhelming. The heat coming off him was a physical caress. "The scent dampening," he said, his voice rough. "It's harder when I'm not there. The pup needs the sire's presence to feel secure. When it feels insecure, it ramps up your senses to scan for threats." I slammed the glass down on the counter, water sloshing over the rim. "Stop calling it that and stop acting like you're some kind of biological necessity. I was fine." "You're trembling, Judith." He reached across the island. I flinched back, my back hitting the refrigerator. He froze. The golden light in his eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by that haunted look I had seen last night. He slowly retracted his hand. "I wasn't going to grab you," he said quietly. "I have something that helps, with the nausea. Sarah used to—" He cut himself off, jaw working. Dr. Albright sent it up. He produced a small glass vial filled with a thick amber liquid from his pocket and set it on the counter, sliding it towards me. "Ginger, peppermint, and a mild sedative safe for pregnancy. It will help dial back the sensory input." I stared at the vial. I wanted to reject it. I wanted to throw it in his face and tell him I didn't need his wolf medicine. But my stomach gave another violent lurch, and the smell of the roast chicken being prepared for dinner somewhere in the building was making my saliva turn thick. I picked up the vial. I didn't thank him. I uncorked it and downed the contents in one swallow. It tasted strong and medicinal, burning a path down my throat. Almost instantly, the sharp edges of the world softened. The nausea unclenched its fist around my stomach. I let out a shaky sigh, leaning against the refrigerator. Roman watched me, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man holding a leash attached to a tiger, terrified to pull too hard, terrified to let go. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," he said, his voice neutral. "You should eat. You're too thin." "I'll eat in my room," I said quickly. The truce was fragile. I wasn't ready for a domestic dinner scene. He hesitated, the alpha instinct to have his pack eat together warring with the agreement. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll have it sent in." He turned to leave the kitchen, but stopped in the doorway. He didn't look back at me. "The money," he said to the doorframe. "It's yours. Do what you want with it. Burn it if it makes you feel better. But it's there." Then he was gone, retreating to his office or his gym, somewhere he could burn off the energy of not being in total control. I stayed in the kitchen, the taste of his remedy on my tongue. I felt better physically, and I despised him for being the source of that relief. I was richer. I had left the tower. I had asserted my will. But as I stood in the heart of his fortress, surrounded by his scent, pregnant with his child, I knew the cage door wasn't really open. It was just slightly ajar, and he was still the one watching the gap. The wind on the 50th floor balcony was merciless. It whipped my hair across my face and stung my cheeks, cold and sharp against the late autumn air. I didn't step back inside. I liked the bite of it. It felt real. I stood at the railing, looking down at the city spread out like a circuit board below me. 6 weeks ago, I had been down there, scurrying in the shadows, terrified of unpaid bills and a father who saw me as an ATM. I had been prey, waiting for something to catch me. Something had caught me, and it had torn me apart. I wasn't better. The bruises had faded from yellow to non-existent, and my ribs no longer ached when I breathed deeply, but the internal landscape was still scorched earth. I still woke up 3 nights out of 5 gasping for air, the phantom sensation of concrete against my back and fangs at my throat, dragging me out of sleep. I still couldn't handle sudden loud noises. I still mapped the exits of every room I entered. But I wasn't cowering in the closet of my guest suite anymore. I wasn't shaking when I walked through the common areas of the penthouse. I heard the glass door slide open behind me. I didn't jump. My enhanced hearing, another unwanted gift from this situation, had tracked his heavy footsteps across the living room rug long before he reached the door. Roman stepped out onto the balcony. The air pressure shifted instantly, heavy with his scent and the sheer heat his body radiated. My stomach, which had been doing a slow, nauseous roll all evening, instantly settled. The biological tether between us tightened, my body recognizing its anchor. I hated the relief, but I accepted it. It was just data now, a tactical advantage in the war my body was fighting against itself. He didn't come up behind me. He didn't crowd me against the railing or wrap his massive arms around me in a suffocating display of possessive protection. That was the old Roman, the one ruled entirely by the damaged instinct to hoard his property. The man who stood next to me now was learning restraint. He stopped 3 feet away, leaning his hip against the railing, looking out at the skyline rather than at me. He was still terrifying, a mountain of muscle and lethal capability, but the energy was different. The golden eyes were banked coals, not an active volcano. We stood in silence for a long time. The wind howled between the skyscrapers. "Dr. Albright says the sickness should pass soon," he said, his voice low, carried away by the wind almost instantly. It was an offering of comfort, awkward and clinical. "It passes when you're around," I said flatly. He flinched slightly. It wasn't a compliment, and we both knew it. It was an acknowledgement of the cage. He turned his head to look at me then. His face, with that brutal scar bisecting his eye, was guarded. He was terrified of breaking the fragile truce we had hammered out. "I can go back inside," he offered, though the words clearly tasted like ash in his mouth. His wolf wanted to be glued to my side, ensuring the safety of its investment. "Stay," I said. "I'm cold." It was a concession, a calculated use of his proximity for my own physical comfort. He understood. He moved a step closer, just enough so that his radiated body heat acted as a shield against the wind, but he didn't touch me. He kept his hands gripping the railing, knuckles white. I looked down at myself. I was wearing one of his thick cashmere sweaters. My old clothes felt flimsy and wrong now. The wind pressed the fabric against my midsection. There was no denying it anymore. The slight, hard curve just above my pelvic bone was real. It wasn't trauma bloat. It wasn't hysteria. It was life, created in the darkest 3 days of mine. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my hand flat over that curve. Roman's breath hitched. His eyes dropped to my hand, his intensity spiking so hot I almost felt burned. He wanted to cover my hand with his. I could feel the impulse vibrating off him. But he didn't move. He stayed gripped to the railing, letting me have the moment. I wasn't filled with maternal love. I felt a profound, terrifying sense of responsibility, mixed with a lingering resentment that tasted like copper. This child was a shackle, binding me to this man and his violent world forever. But as I stood there, 50 stories up, shielded from the wind by the monster who had broken me, I realized something else. I wasn't ash. I had been burned down, yes, but the fire hadn't destroyed me. It had forged me. I looked at Roman. He was watching me with an expression that was equal parts guilt, possessiveness, and a strange, dawning awe. I wasn't free. I never would be again. I was bound to the Alpha's dangerous heat, but I wasn't just surviving it anymore. I was learning how to wield it. "We need to discuss the security protocols for the next appointment," I said, my voice steady over the wind. Roman nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "We will. Inside." He stepped back, holding the door open for me. He waited for me to pass. I walked through the door first. I didn't look back. I walked into the golden cage, my hand still resting on my stomach, ready for the next round. 3 years later. The sunlight here was different than in the city. It didn't bounce off cold steel and unforgiving glass. It soaked into the warm pine boards of the deck and smelled of the surrounding mountains. I sat in an Adirondack chair, a mug of herbal tea warming my hands, looking out over the glassy surface of the private lake. It was quiet here, so incredibly quiet. It had taken Roman 2 years to agree to move out of the fortress in the sky, to trade the absolute suffocating security of the penthouse for something that felt like actual life. This fortified lake house, tucked away in the mountains with a security perimeter hidden in the dense tree line, was our compromise. I took a deep breath, the clean air filling lungs that no longer felt constantly constricted by fear. I was healthy. The hollowed-out ghost girl who had existed in the months after the bunker was gone. I was strong again. I still had scars. There was a faint silvery line on my wrist from a time I tried to claw my way out of a panic attack, and I still despised sudden loud noises. I still instinctually mapped the exits of any new room I entered. But those were just parts of my history now, not the bars of my daily prison. A squeal of pure delight erupted from the sprawling green lawn below. I looked down. Roman was on his hands and knees in the grass, a hulking mountain of a man being attacked by a 2-year-old whirlwind of dark curls and chubby limbs. Ilara had his eyes, that startling molten gold that used to freeze the blood in my veins. But when she looked at me, there was only innocence. It was surreal to watch him. The man who had once been a creature of pure destructive ID, a man whose presence used to suck the oxygen out of a room, now froze in exaggerated defeat because a toddler was tugging on his t-shirt. His patience with her was boundless. His massive hands, which had once caused so much damage, moved around her with exquisite gentleness, terrified of bruising her delicate skin. The feral energy that used to radiate off him like heat waves had settled. It was a deep, steady hum of warmth now. Oh, he was still dangerous. I saw the way his golden eyes flicked toward the edge of the woods every 30 seconds, scanning for threats only he could sense. But the danger was no longer pointed at me. It was pointed outward, a shield between his family and the rest of the world. We hadn't arrived at this peace easily. The road from the penthouse to this deck had been brutal. It was paved with grueling therapy sessions, with screaming fights where I enforced my boundaries like a lion tamer holding back a tiger with a kitchen chair. There was the agonizingly slow process of Roman learning to use his words instead of his growls, learning to ask instead of take. There were times in that first year I almost packed a bag and ran, times the trauma threatened to swallow me whole again. But he had kept his word. He never hurt me again. He protected me ferociously, sometimes even from his own darker instincts. And when Alara was born, something in him fundamentally shifted. The beast had finally found peace. Down on the lawn, Roman sensed my gaze. He looked up, and the intense vigilance on his scarred face melted instantly into something soft. He stood up, dusting grass off his knees, and scooped up our laughing daughter. He walked up the wooden steps onto the deck, the boards creaking under his considerable weight. He sat on the bench beside my chair, close enough that our arms brushed. The scent of him, cedar, sunshine, and that deep underlying alpha musk, washed over me. Once that smell had been a trigger for pure, paralyzing terror. Now, it just smelled like home. It smelled like safety. "She's exhausting," he murmured, though his voice was thick with adoration as Alara shoved a slobbery toy wolf into his cheek. "She takes after her father," I said softly, reaching out to smooth Alara's wild hair. Roman went still for a moment. He shifted Alara to his hip and placed his free hand over mine on the armrest. His thumb traced the skin of my wrist, a habitual, silent apology. His golden eyes met mine, filled with a depth of human emotion that the creature in the bunker would never have been capable of feeling. "Are you happy, Judith?" he asked quietly. It was a question he asked periodically, a lingering ghost of his past sins, needing reassurance that he hadn't destroyed me completely. I looked out at the serene lake, then at the beautiful, chaotic child we had made against all odds, and finally back at the reformed monster holding my hand. The fire that burned my life down 3 years ago had been devastating, but it had cleared the ground for this to grow. I leaned my head against his solid shoulder, a voluntary act of trust and affection. "Yes, Roman," I whispered, finally realizing it was entirely true. "I'm happy. We made it." The alpha's dangerous heat was still there, burning just beneath the surface, but it no longer scorched me. It just kept us warm.
I see a shadow when I close my eyes. Every road I take still leads to you somehow. They say our timing's wrong, our worlds collide, but my heart never learned how to back down. We're standing still on a moving line, afraid to fall, afraid to fly, but every breath I hold inside whispers your name like a crime. What if we don't fight the feeling? What if we let it burn bright? Even if the world keeps breaking us, I'd still choose you. They can say it's wrong,